boss advocate, normally when she sits down, everyone sits down, respectfully so. Good morning, colleagues, and welcome to this wonderful and auspicious occasion. My name is Chabu Baroi. I speak on behalf of the Commission for Gender Equality. Mine is not to speak a lot, it's about to direct the program and let those that are going to speak and speak what they have to say. And we welcome those who are streaming live in all the Commission for Gender Equality social media platform. On YouTube is Commission for Gender Equality, and on Facebook is Commission for Gender Equality. And some of this information will be posted on the E-Head and Higher Education social media platforms. And we will also be taking questions from all those platforms should they need a right. And we welcome you all and greetings to everyone back home and in here. Colleagues, we have the three institutions: the Commission for Gender Equality, the Department of Higher Education and Training, and Higher Health, in order to deal with the issues at hand. And we seek to ensure that the campuses that our kids and the next generation are safe, and also it's a safer environment and a safer space for them. And on that note, colleagues, I need also to give you a few pointers. We have got bathrooms on the way outside to our right, there are stairs. There's a passage. The bathrooms are on the left, and some you call them restrooms on the left. And then secondly, we also have got meal tickets for those that are in here, and we will be giving those during lunchtime. And we also welcome the members of the media who have indicated that they'll be online, and those that are in here. And we greatly appreciate so that whatever is going to be discussed out in here today is going to be taken out there in the world. And on that note, I want to welcome the Commission for Gender Equality Chairperson Advocate Tabitse Sipanya Mokale to welcome and officially open the proceeding. I thank you. I thought you would clap hands. If you don't do that for my boss, it's not good on me.
Sorry, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Jawood likes harassing me, even if I call it to order, that's not to repent. I would like to take this opportunity to welcome you. The notes that have been prepared for me, but I usually am at my best when I freestyle. Today's event is basically about the Department of Higher Education responding to the research that we have done in institutions of higher learning that relates to violence against women, men, and disabled in those environments. We have actually packaged these studies into reports, and I think it was in December, we went to the Department of Higher Education to present these reports, and what we found was a breath of fresh air. We are used to people being very defensive. We're used to people being very dismissive. We're used to people being very undermining. And we got to an environment where the meeting started on time, and you said, this is not good enough for me. I want more. I want to take your recommendations out there to those institutions. I'm going to bring together, I'm going to put this to the table of Council for Higher Education. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. All the things that you read with and did. And today we are here to come and confirm that collaboration, and it's more beyond collaboration, but it's about you saying, I would like to respond to the reports, and we really appreciate it. Your commitment to respond to the reports actually is embedded in the preamble of the Constitution that says something about we the people of South Africa. But part of it talks about we the people of South Africa to ensure safety for each and every one of us so that they optimize their opportunities. Our report is exactly based on that, where we felt the higher education environment must enable others to optimize their environment so that they're able to contribute to our country. But again, your response is also embedded in chapter 3 of the Constitution that talks about cooperative governance. I think it's 44.2 or 42.4, I'm open to correction there, that actually says government, department, and state institutions must put in place projects or interventions where the need is. So you are actually responding to your constitutional obligations. We really do appreciate that. And those constitutional obligations are actually beautifully embedded in section 7.2, which says the state must respond, respect, and protect the rights embedded in the Bill of Rights. As you all know, Section 90 of the Constitution says no one has a right to be discriminated against based on their race, gender, religion, ethnic or social origin, sexual orientation, sex, pregnancy, disability, religion, culture. There are so many listed there. And therefore, we are here to actually say we cannot be in an environment where people are discriminated based on any of those, but we also cannot be in an environment where people feel unsafe in environments where they should be feeling safe the most. That unsafety, incidentally, undermines Section 10, which talks about human dignity. It undermines Section 12, I think D or something, which talks about the right to a safe environment. So we are here to actually revive and reconfirm that we as the CGE are going to work with you to ensure that that environment that is pronounced in the Constitution is actually realized and realizable in our lifetime. Thank you very much and welcome, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Chairperson Advocate Sipanya Mutale. That was succinct and profound and to the point. The person that I want to call now, I should think you gave him the blessings. When he met with you in November, December, he was an acting HOD. As I talk to you today, is the new HOD. It should be.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, as well as the Deputy Minister, Chairperson, and Commissioners. Mine is to deliver the purpose of the engagement. The Commission for Gender Equality is established in terms of Section 187 of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. It is mandated to promote respect for gender equality, for the protection, development, and attainment of gender equality in the Republic of South Africa. Section 187, subsection 2 of the Constitution gives the CGE the powers as regulated by national legislation to perform its function, including the power to monitor, investigate, research, lobby, advise, report on issues concerning gender equality. The Commission, in collaboration with the Department of Higher Education and Training and Higher Health, welcomes you to this auspicious event. The purpose of this launch of the outreach campaigns on sexual harassment and reports on CGE reports on institutions of higher learning is to address and accelerate gender transformation within South Africa's higher education sector and identifying key challenges holding institutions accountable and recommending actionable solutions to promote gender equality. Through comprehensive research and investigative hearings, the Commission aims to drive policy development, enhance representation, improve institutional practices, and create a safer, more inclusive environment for women, persons with disability, and LGBTQI persons in higher education. programs and initiatives aimed at furthering awareness, accountability and implementation of the CGE's recommendations will be held throughout the country during the current financial year between the three institutions that are partnering herein. And during the event of today, discussions will be held on the following: the observations on sexual harassment in the post-education and training sector, the PSEC sector, the GBVF and technological support for GBV survivors. Another discussions will be around gender transformation, diversity and inclusion, as well as the proposed solutions on the issues emanating in the higher education sector. We wish you a fruitful engagement on and your contribution to fostering inclusion, equality, diversity and safety at all campuses. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shupin, for the purpose of the day, and I hope everyone at home, should there be need to ask those who have just logged in, we have got a team of dedicated staff members from various institutions. DHEAD, we have got C. Postman, and we have got the Higher Health also. We have got the Commission for Gender Equality, Mr. Silon Legua, who is on the platform. And the platform that have been used, as I've said earlier on, it's Commission for Gender Equality. We're streaming live in all the platforms for the Commission for Gender Equality. Like I've said, when I started, I wouldn't be coming up and down here. The program will direct itself. I'll be calling these key eminent people one by one. After they will be following one another. We'll start with the Chief Executive Officer, Dr. Professor Ramnik from Higher Health, and then we'll follow by Advocate Tavsen Spanya Mohale, and then we'll follow by the Deputy Minister, Dr. Gondwe. And they'll follow that sequence so that I don't come here and disrupt the proceedings, the flow of events. I thank you.
Good morning, everyone. This is a very weak morning. Good morning. Happy at least somebody's paying attention. Honorable Deputy Minister, Chairperson of the CGE, Commissioners, Judy from the Department of Higher Education Training, Ceci and everyone else, colleagues who are here from media and from Higher Health and USEF and everyone. I just wanted to say all protocols observed and greetings from my side. Thank you for having me. Please, with your permission, I have a presentation that I'd like to do for my few minutes that I've been allocated so that I can take you through my role of my presentation towards what's the role of PHET and Higher Health together in battling gender-based violence in the institution of higher learning. I just thought it would be more appropriate if I show you things that we are working around towards battling this massive pandemic. I just wanted to check, Cindy, do you have the presentation? Okay, thank you. So, colleagues, I hope you can see the presentation. I can't move it, so will you be able to move it? Or, please, just to let you know, let's go slowly. I'm not as intelligent as you can think. Please give me some time. Just can you go a little down? Yes. Thank you. So colleagues, first of all, Higher Health has all 26 universities and members of Higher Health. And we're very proud of that. We can't win this without the institutions of higher learning. And I just thought this is important. The next slide. Higher Health has partnership with 50 public TVET colleges. And I think that is very critical. In fact, to the level that Higher Health has presence in all TVET colleges in South Africa and all universities. When I count universities, I'm counting human lives, and I'm talking about if Northwest University, I'm talking about Mafeking campus separately, I'm talking about Wall campus separately, I'm talking about Poch campus separately. So which means every site is independent and autonomous and dealt separately. Similarly, in our TVET colleges, we have 300 sites countrywide. In fact, to the level that every rural area, every peri-urban South Africa, every township, go to Alex, you'll find about 4 sites where higher health is. And I just wanted to re-emphasize the fact that gender-based violence should not be urbanized. Like we always, we hear WITS, we hear UCT, we hear a number of social media platforms there, but when we do not hear where social media is not that dominant in our rural areas, but I just wanted to inform violence happens there almost equally as much as we see it in the urban centers. That's why I wanted to take this slide forward. The other important part is, the next slide, is our community education training colleges. About 1,800 sites run with the partnership with basic education, run with schools, a lot of housewives, a lot of people suffering with gender-based violence come to those institutions for a second innings to get skills to build the economy of this country. And just thought we should keep in mind 1,800 sites in this country. Next slide. This is the model of higher health. I just thought I'd spend about 2 minutes on this one. You can't run gender-based violence without not tackling the other issues of gender-based violence. And my mark, the predominant factor of higher health existence is a priority area called transforming mentalities, gender-based violence, gender equality, the entire gender education system. But how can, you are all very, very intelligent people in the room, but anything in this slide you pick up that is not interconnected. Can we win gender-based violence without mental health? Which means we have to have an entire focus on mental health. When 8 million South Africans live with HIV, and we know one of the biggest reasons of HIV is transactional sex, forceful sex, rape. Can we remove that? If we know unplanned pregnancy is extremely high in South Africa. In fact, to the level that 1/3 young women in post-school education in TVET colleges become pregnant on campus as per higher health studies. And they drop out. Only 10% come back to education. So if 1 in 3 young women sexually violated, 1 in 4 young South Africans mentally challenged with the problem of mental health challenges, as per WHO study, 1 in 4 in the post-school education, 1 in 5 in South Africa. 1 in 3 young women, 8 million South Africans with HIV. 65% of every case of gender-based violence in South Africa is preceded by drugs and alcohol. We are the highest in the world. The country next to us is America with 58%. So how can we tackle GBV without drugs and alcohol? 11% of estimated population of higher education is gender diverse, LGBTQIA+. Only 30% graduate. 70% of our population through stigma, through not being given opportunities the way we can. One of the best human intelligent brains lost in the system. We cannot win without this. One of the biggest reasons of people with disabilities is suffering with gender-based violence. Their vulnerability exposes them to this. The biggest jobs that will be affected with gender will be because of climate change. Nobody's talking about climate change agenda. How do we build our new South Africa for climate change and climate action? Financial literacy, killing poverty, civic education, human rights, constitution, patriotism. So we can't deal GBV without not tackling every factor around it. So, gender-based violence, the problem of gender-based violence, but the solution is not gender-based violence. The solution is factors around gender-based violence and tackling every factor. And that is the higher health model. And that is why I'm very grateful to the Department and Deputy Minister for supporting this model. Because comprehensively is the only solution we can build this by tackling every factor. Next slide. Our Honorable President, the Honorable President has put a very important issue on peace and women and its highest exposure to gender-based violence, and I'll speak about it. Next slide. We'll go very quickly. We know these data, but I wanted you to see one data of higher health studies. 62% of students feel unsafe on campuses and say they are at high risk of GP. As a person in higher education, despite we have higher health, we have systems. We acknowledge there's a problem. Violence, protection, campus safety, security, these are issues that we need to tackle. Next slide. Even today in South Africa, 55% of males and 54% of females think sexual violence does not include forcing sex with someone you love. If that's our education levels, in the post-school system, how will we transform South Africa? How will we fight GP? Next slide. What's happening in our campuses? Everything. We have domestic violences, partner violences, we have rape, date rape, sexual assault, staff-student relationships, sex for marks, sex for employment, harassment, gender bullying, and homophobic bullying. So CGE, you're not far away from our data. Next slide. Next slide. I'll go quickly. So what are the risk factors? Previous victimization, sex for mark, sex for work, intimate partner violence, first years away from home, peer influence, lots of drugs and alcohol and consumption, abuse, naiveness, transactional sex, high predominance in our TVET colleges, community colleges, specifically when taxi workers and taxi rank has clearly shown evidence of our young women who are very vulnerable. And they're poor. Campus safety and security, gender inequality, inequitable attitudes, these are realities of us as our country. We need to embrace it. Next slide. There are challenges of underreporting, as CGE would rightfully have taken up. There's lack of confidence, there's fear of perpetrators, there's anxiety, there's not wanting to expose one's identity, not wanting to label the victim on their head, IPV and domestic violence. I just thought I should put the reality up front first. And now I will go to our solutions. Next slide. This is one big solution. The new Sexual Offences Act in 2023. A historic moment by the constitution of this country. I'm very proud of South Africa, of this one. It says every young woman before the age of 25 in PSET is now considered to be a vulnerable woman. It's been a hard-fought battle, thanks to our policy framework truly in 2020 when the department released this. It's become a reality. What it says is, it's because mandatory for institutions, if they know of a suspect of sexual offense, or has he committed against a vulnerable person, has to report this case immediately to SAPS. Which means the first point of departure has to be the criminal justice system, not our own quasi-system where we can tamper with the evidence. The trust can only be built if evidence is saved and the person who's coming out is protected. And that's where this offensive act, Sexual Offences Act, changes the whole equation on the table for higher education. And that is where we are leading South Africa towards. It takes a very formulated partnership between DHET, Higher Health and NPA, where any case reported in the post-school education will be first taken to a Tutu Zelenge center, to the nearest Tutu Zelenge center, properly examined, criminal offensive act system started, evidence be secured protectively, and it's a duty of us as an institution to do it. Next slide. There are many legal frameworks that are guiding us. The Constitution, the Employment Equity, the Code of Good Practice, and other promotions of equality and prevention of unfair discrimination. So the Constitution is protecting us. So which means we can bring justice, and our trust with South Africans will only build if they can trust us. That I can confide into them and say, we had a challenge, can you help us? And if we help them, more people will come. And that's the motto we are going for. Next slide. And we've done well from the way we see it, not completely achieved. The Domestic Violence Act 2022 has clearly indicated that any intimate partner violence prevalent on campus is now considered as domestic violence. And now there's room for higher education to believe in our constitution, work with the criminal justice system and build justification into that system. And that has changed a lot of the reality. So 2022, historic milestones that have brought into how South Africa must and how peace and persistence must embrace towards fighting gender-based violence. Next slide. But we have our own Bible, released in 2020. Now what we're doing is we are aligning our Bible, which is our policy, which is the department's policy, to the new Sexual Offences Act and the Domestic Violence Act and all the other systems that I spoke to. Three big pillars that we're fighting. Let's create an enabling environment, exactly how I'm saying. Let people who suffer with GBV report and be brave enough to report and get justice. Let's make our campuses safe. Prevention, let's not get into GBV. And the third one is have every support and assistance available for survivors, including perpetrators who want to reform in this country. Have systems for them. Next slide. We've aligned our policy to NSP. We started a year before NSP was being planned by the President. But then quickly we aligned our DHET policy framework to the National Strategic Plan. Next slide. Victims have now options. There is a civil claim, there is a criminal justice system, there is Domestic Violence Act, there is labor law, and there is an internal quasi system in the institution of higher learning. You pick one of them, you will be connected to all. That should be how South Africa should be. And that's where we're heading towards. Next slide. All interconnected. The Sexual Offences Act and the DHET framework of higher education is now interconnected. Which means any case, whether you're in Fort Clare, whether you're in TVET college, you hear about it, you take it immediately to the criminal justice system and start a register. It also clearly says, you are in the register, you can't get a job again. It goes very deep if you read the whole Sexual Offences Act system and our alignment to the framework. We're trying. It's going to be difficult with our management, our universities are autonomous, but this is the right way. Because now the Constitution holds them accountable for this. Next slide. Next slide. We have a number of protocols. Code of ethics, sexual offensive rape, staff-student relationships, campus safety and security. I just wanted to talk about this campus safety and security one. We went to a campus in Mandeni TVET College, DN. In Mandeni TVET College in rural KZN, there were 10 cases of GBV reported every month. That's how serious the issues were. So we went to Mandeni to understand what's happening there. Why? We found there's a street light from the campus to the town in Mandeni, a small rural town, full with bushes around and no lights. And remember in winters, the sun sets very early in KZN. So that light was a problem. We went straight to the mayor's office, sat down, we didn't leave till he put the light. With just one small intervention, we dropped the cases from 10 to 1. So what I'm saying is, sometimes it's no rocket science. Sometimes it's all about putting an audit. And that's why these protocols are important. What is campus safety audit? Can we do simple things? Bathroom matches, check at the sports complex in University of Limpopo. Simple issue. Can reduce drastically the domestic violence. So I think accountability at every angle helps us with these protocols. Everything from campus safety, residence, in private accommodation, how to implement a case of GBV in campus, step by step, whistleblowing, protecting intimate partner violence, men and boys, sexual exploitation, digital abuse. Next slide. We have a GBV task team and chairperson. Your attendance to the task team makes a lot of difference, CGE. You are always, and you are a very proud partner of our task team, ministerial task team. But what we have in the task team is the entire department, each unit, university branch, TVET, CET, social inclusion. We have Department of Women, exactly DM your vision. Department of Health, Social Development, SAPS, NPA, USAP, SAPCO, students, civil society, survivors, people who should matter. It's a very comprehensive. You can't win it without higher education will never be able to win this pandemic alone. It's not possible. It can only be possible if we all together. SAPS has to play their role, NPA plays their role, health plays their role, higher education plays their role, the survivor protects. The human-centric approach. Next slide. Just to give you guidelines on the flow chart, how the protocol is. Clear what an institution must see as soon as the case is reported. Where the case must go. What's the role of campus security. How the evidence must be protected. Where the student must be taken or a staff must be taken on any victim who's reported a case of GBV. What options they have. Internal disciplinary system and the PSEC versus the Sexual Offensive Act that makes this person go to the criminal justice system very quickly. The help of psychosocial assistance, the presence of social worker and psychologists, the victims or survivor-centric approach. As we say, the word sounds very easy. It is to put that system in it. You know, when we say survivor support, what it is, everything needs to be outlined, and that's what our protocol is. The presence, who first receives, how it is managed, both within the working hours and after working hours. Who does after working hours? And that's the detail we went into with that one. Next slide. Next slide again. Just the guidelines, please. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Thank you. Next slide. Next slide. Thank you. Next slide. Next slide. Thank you. We also wanted to tell you what we have done in higher education. And that is why, Chairperson, I was telling you UNESCO has been. We built gender as a skills gap in this country. If 1 in 3 young women suffer with gender-based violence, then there is definitely a skills problem in this country, according to my understanding and how we think. So let's build gender education mandatory for our young people. Everybody in South Africa must know gender. Part of our co-curriculum as a vision we started. So we have 2 types of curriculums in higher education. In every TVET college, in community college, in university in South Africa. One, you can have an informal curriculum, which is you don't get a certificate or credit, but you do it like a co-curriculum or extramural. The second is a formalized curriculum, where you even get a certificate or accreditation through the QCTO. The first qualification on civic and soft skills launched by higher education. First module, civic education, digital citizenship, constitution, ethics, saving our democracy, everything about civic education. The module 2 is mandating, Chairperson, gender studies. 7 credits attached to it. Module 3 is mental health. Module 4, disability. Disability not for people with disabilities. Disability for every South African to understand disability. What forms of disability? CSC, sexuality, drugs and alcohol addiction, climate, financial literacy. It is, you can be NQF level 1, thanks to our cabinet. You can be NQF level 1, which is grade 8. You can join this, and you will come out NQF level 5. Few hours. It is QCTO endorsed, accredited. So you get certificates, you get credits. You accumulate them on your CV. You go to an employer in South Africa and say, I have done gender studies. And CGE, I'm telling you, I'm putting my own reputation at risk, and I'm telling you that I'm going to chase these indicators. The first indicator, students that do this, civic and soft skills, early, how many of them graduate in time? Are they responsible South Africans? How many of them vote in the next elections? How many of them actually get jobs early? You've got a certificate of gender, you've got a certificate of mental health, you've got climate, you've got financial literacy. You should change South Africa. And they accumulate credits. It's UNESCO endorsed. We're going to build global South Africans. Citizens that can be in South Africa, work in Zimbabwe, but understand gender. Or work in Africa. Because that is why UNESCO endorsed. It's going to be built in all South African languages. So gender studies must not be only in English. It can be in Wenda, it can be Zulu, it can be all over 12 languages, including sign language. Currently, 2,200 students with disabilities from University of Pretoria are doing it, as I speak to you right now. In this month, they will be graduating out of it. So that's how transformation will happen. And it is fully digitally built. Next slide. We're launching at Module 9, Digital Literacy and AI, and our 7th administration focuses it, and we totally believe in building a digital South Africa. Next slide. 10 soft skills, empathy, civic responsibility, conflict resolution, critical thinking. These needs to be built along with gender studies. And we're going to build soft skills for this country. We're going to treat gender as a soft skill in this country. That is what I was emphasizing. But not alone. Link it to mental health, link it to gender-based, to sexuality education, link it to drugs and alcohol addiction, link it to climate. Next slide. All SDGs. Chairperson, you're traveling, and DM, you're traveling to New York on behalf of South Africa. South Africa is the only country that has built 17 SDGs in one curriculum taken into the youth, not just to the policy makers. That's how seriously we take SDGs. And this is one qualification fully linked to all 17 SDGs. Every module. Next slide. So you can apply on your phone, finish it. Those South Africans who don't have compatible phone, we have a huge digital poverty in this country. We have computer labs. Every Friday, Saturday, Sunday, any village in South Africa, any township in South Africa, any university, higher health, mobile computer labs run. Let us just this weekend, there were about 2,000 young South Africans that were in computer labs doing this curriculum, gender studies. And I'll show you some impact data which we have, quick data, to show that it works for us. You can do gender, you can do civic, you can do disability, you can financial literacy, you can get your credits straight to your CV, straight to your LinkedIn, and build your CV. This is how we're going to change first years to this. Next slide. Value proposition, we need to build skills to the hard skills. Create more jobs, good citizenship. Next slide. Next slide. So you can see the gender module, CGE. Understanding GBV, transforming mentalities, the law and your rights, the importance of the role of men in countering GBV, gender equality and equity, sexual and gender diversity. Similarly, you have a drugs and alcohol module, which links to GBV. You look at the next one, if we have climate, look, gender and climate change. It's a specific module every grade 8 and 9 in South Africa is going to learn. Next slide. It's QCT accredited. So this is fully assessed, properly valued, marked. Next slide. So you can't just learn. You will do exams, assess, and everything. Next slide. It's UNESCO endorsed, global endorsement. We're the first African organization to be a global partner to UNESCO, building on this project. We really acknowledge. Next slide. We have a 24-hour helpline, toll-free in all languages. Please call this number today and tell me it works. 0800363636. What jobs we have given to entry-level psychologists, social workers, counselors. They come out of the institutions, they join, they do a few hours with us, 24 hours, and help our students. Report the case. It's for mental health, it's for gender, it's for every violence. Next slide. Just wanted to show some impact. CGE. 367,000 learners of South Africa in the last 2 years took this curriculum on gender. Look how many cases. 19,943 young women came out open to higher help. Not all of them wanted Sexual Offensive Act, they wanted help. They wanted just to talk and deal with their partner. Some things can be managed much early. These are lives that we could lose. These are lives that can be saved early. Prevention. You know, if you have diabetes, I can tell you, if I don't pick your diabetes early, remember I'm a kidney specialist, you'll come at a stage when your kidneys have failed. At that time, if I put diabetic medication, it's a bit too late. Gender-based violence, mental health, if something is early, you pick it up early. Your knowledge makes you to say something is going wrong. Let me seek help. You can reverse the problem much easier. You don't let the problem go to a suicide, murder, death.
harassed and hounded out of universities if they were to report. So it's one of those things that continues to go unreported and continues to cause a lot of trauma for students. In fact, I was talking to one of the professors at a university, and I was saying, how is it that lecturers cannot go to one of the lecture halls to meet with the students to take them through their studies rather than students going to their offices? Why can't we have lecture hall G, ground floor number 17, which would most probably be empty every afternoon because the program would inform that, and that is where lecturers would meet with students, because we have realized that this issue of consulting lecturers in their offices is where most of the violations happen. The toxic masculinity culture that continues unabated in so many ways. Okay. Somebody saying things that I've said. In terms of science, it would be an echo. So we are suggesting a few things. Thanks, Prof. Ramnik. You have already raised some of the issues. A compulsory gender module that would actually be a part of the education right from induction and orientation of staff and students in the universities. Comprehensive gender policies that would be standardized and implemented and monitored, because sometimes it's actually the variation that keeps the violations alive in a lot of the institutions. We had, as part of our investigations, an institution that actually had based its policy on 1920. We found a university that said, here's our thingy. It was drawn up in 1920, and we rely on it. 1920, there's nobody here who was alive in 1920, but this is what we found. And we would also like that compulsory gender module to reach all students, staff, and everyone at these universities. It must be compulsory from the get-go. People need to understand what violations are, and others need to understand, should you go through this, you have a right to report. Institutions must prioritize the recruitment of women and persons with disabilities, ensuring well-represented decision-making. Institutions must prioritize persons with members of the LGBTQI community, and over and above that, recognize that they need to have an enabling environment in terms of where they are, in terms of respect, in terms of their safety, and everything that is needed for them as equal human beings in the environment. Women need to be recruited intentionally into the decision-making structures, and as we said, supported. The fourth one, DM, that I would like to bring to your attention, and I know we discussed extensively in December when we met, was the late release of funding. We find there's a lot of sexual violence that is meted at students who either the money has not been released or they are not even sure that they have actually been admitted. So it's not only the late release, but the late confirmation of allocation of funding. There are a lot of students who sit there and they do not know whether they will be funded by NSFAS or not. And those that do know, up to May and as late as June, are still struggling with that. And we find that there are sharks out there. In fact, DM, I think we need to have a campaign where we're saying university residences must be there, university residences. How is it that our universities now are saying, no, we can only accommodate a certain number of students because of the universities that we built in 1920? When I was at VETS many years ago, VETS was admitting only 6,000 students, only 6,000. And one wonders, and everybody could fit into the rests. That is why we, the black students, had to go out of rest, and there was a bus ferrying us in and out. But it cannot be that even today, you have a university like VET saying, yes, we can only accommodate 10,000. And at that point, you find that in terms of their faculties and admission and money that they have to make, they've made room for 100,000 students. Something is not right there. We need to have universities invest in universities, in university residences, or else limit themselves to the number of students that can be accommodated in their residences, because we see a situation where sharks are built. There is a university where the community opposite where it is actually ran out to go and look for other accommodation and converted their homes into university accommodation. And the things that are happening there, it's actually shocking. So maybe we need to have a campaign that says universities must provide, or else take only those that can afford to take. Regular monitoring and compliance audits. It's important, once you have a strat plan DM, to actually have an auditing tool that will audit all the things that are in the strat plan, so that we are able to even factor in issues of GBV, factor in issues of sexual harassment, factor in issues of sex for marks, and factor in sex for accommodation, and all of those things in our universities. Universities are supposed to be a microcosm of our communities, and therefore they cannot have a strategic plan that does not take into consideration all of these issues. NPA to also include institutions of higher health in their, as their citizens. By include, we need to make sure that when the NPA accounts for its statistics, it needs to have, as part of its category, higher institutions in the vicinity or in the jurisdiction that they are serving. It cannot be that you have a TVET college in the university and you have a house where the owner of the house at month end comes to rape. It's not to sleep with. It's to rape all the students who have not yet received their money and go away, and it is normal. That has got to be, that house, that home, that university has got to recognize those students and count those students as part of the citizens that must be accounted for, whose safety must be accounted for by the NPA and other stakeholders. With those few words, DM, I'll leave it here because we're still going to discuss this, but I just wanted to whet the appetite of some of the issues that were in our reports. Thank you.
Dumela. Le kae? Re teng. For the benefit of those who don't know who I am, my name is Dr. Mimi Gondwe. I'm the Deputy Minister for Higher Education and Training, one of two Deputy Ministers. I think when I assumed the position, I kind of wondered why we had to be two. But after I established that we have over 100 entities, including 26 public universities, 50 TVET colleges, 9 community colleges which have satellites. You've got your NSFAS, you've got your CETAs, which are 21, and then you have your quality assurance bodies, and the list goes on and on. So we have our work really cut out. And I really want to thank you all for attending today, because this started with a vision on my part. In December last year, I had a meeting with the CGE where I said, I want to work with you. You keep coming up with these reports, important reports I might add. The CGE, ladies and gentlemen, is a Chapter 9 institution. It deserves the same respect as the Office of the Auditor General or the Office of the Public Protector. Very few institutions can say that they're a creature of the Constitution. This one is definitely one. And so it was very important for me. And I think my legal background probably plays a role in the approach that I've taken here, because I've realized the pivotal role that they play in our country and in our societies. So I really want to thank them from the bottom of my heart, and of course Higher Health under Professor Ramnick, our Social Inclusion and Equity Directorate at the Department of Higher Education and Training. I want to thank them from the bottom of my heart for embracing this vision I had of us walking this road together. I think Professor Ramnick aptly put it when he said, we can't do this work alone. Collaboration, collaboration, collaboration is the key here. That wasn't part of my speech, but I had to say it. But let me start with my speech. Program Director, Mr. Javu Baloi, the CEO of the Commission for Gender Equality, Dr. Dennis Matotoka, Chairperson of the Commission for Gender Equality, Advocate Ntabise Nsipanya Mukhale, the CEO of Higher Health, Prof. Ramnick Aluwala, the commissioners from the CGE, Commissioner Naidu, there are two Naidus, Commissioner Ngomangen and Commissioner Ngwenya, the Deputy Director Generals from the Department of Higher Education and Training, officials of the Commission for Gender Equality, Higher Health, and the Department of Higher Education, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, please receive my sincere greetings this morning. I want to start by once again expressing my utmost gratitude to all of you for making time to attend this crucial event. We are meeting here today as different stakeholders to launch the collaboration between the Commission for Gender Equality, Higher Health, and the Department of Higher Education and Training, aimed at advancing and promoting gender equality and fostering inclusive learning and teaching environments. We are also here to officially announce and launch our collaborative outreach program to our various institutions of higher education. I want to appreciate the efforts taken by the CGE in conducting a number of investigative hearings into our post-school education and training institutions. These investigative hearings have led to a number of significant reports, including the recent reports on sexual harassment and the state of gender transformation in the PSET system. I also want to appreciate Higher Health and the Department of Higher Education and Training through its Social Inclusion and Equity Directorate for being a part of this very crucial collaboration. I believe we're in this collaboration because we're all passionate about and committed to advancing and promoting gender equality and transformation in the PSET system. And who better than us as a collective to make this happen? Our PSET sector is characterized by a high level of gender-based violence and a slow pace of gender transformation. I want to take the country into my confidence and unequivocally and unreservedly state that we're taking the reports produced by the CGE seriously, and we're committed to ending GBV and sexual harassment in our institutions of higher learning. And because the issues of GBV and gender transformation form part and parcel of my delegations as the Deputy Minister of Higher Education and Training, they're right at the top of the list of my delegations, and I take them seriously. Like I said when I received my delegations, I recognize that I cannot do this work on my own. My principle is therefore to be accessible, available, and accountable. I therefore collaboration of different stakeholders who've come on board to ensure we collectively tackle the challenges facing our sector and provide lasting and impactful solutions to these challenges. It is sad that even after so many years of democracy, there's still a shortage of women in leadership positions in our institutions of higher learning. Gender equality, GBV, sexual harassment, and gender transformation have to form part of the everyday agenda of our institutions so that women are not left feeling vulnerable and at the margins of transformation. The empowerment and inclusion of women in everyday decision-making is therefore very important for our democracy to thrive. Gender equality promotes social cohesion and the economic emancipation of women. For as long as we have fastened our brakes on gender equality and diversity, we will never be transformed. I'm a fervent believer that empowering women in higher education is a form of pushing back against GBV. This collaboration further seeks to address issues such as patriarchy and toxic masculinity in the PSET system. Student leaders need to play a leading role in championing gender transformation, more especially male student leaders. They need to know and understand the negative effects of patriarchy on both men and women and how it manifests itself in many aspects of our society, including in the academic space. The National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide, the policy framework to address gender-based violence in the PSET system, the Sexual Offences and Related Matters Amendment Act and the Domestic Violence Act are but a few of the acts, regulations, and policies in place to assist us all in carving a way forward and creating a PSET system that is far from inequality and gender-based violence. Moreover, international treaties such as the International Labour Organization's Convention 190 and its Recommendation 206 require that all employers recognize the right of everyone to a world of work free from violence and harassment, including gender-based violence. They further provide that violence and harassment constitute a human right violation and are a threat to equal opportunities. Ladies and gentlemen, we still live in a patriarchal world where men are modeled to dominate and disregard the contributions of their female counterparts. As such, we're constantly regressing in the pursuit for gender equality. While we appreciate the emancipation of some men and women, we should note that the slow pace of transformation will come back to bite us one day. We require and need consistency, and this generation must affect the next generation positively. We cannot afford to continue seeing each generation bearing their share of the patriarchal load, and as such, we'll need to find lasting solutions that will work for generations to come, or we risk having a vicious cycle. As much as this is a process that will take a long time to achieve, with commitment and sheer determination, we'll definitely see the change we need and must see. Program Director, I want to challenge the men in this room and in society to ask themselves what role they're playing in ensuring that we have gender equality and a society that is free of violence against women and children. I'm singling out the men Program Director because the statistics prove that our men are the primary perpetrators of GBV and the faces behind some of the reports that have brought us here today. It is no longer enough for a man to say, I do not harm women and children. They must be able to also say how they respond to their friends, their brothers, their nephews, their colleagues or teammates who they know are harming women and children. GVB and its eradication from our society Program Director is without a doubt everybody's business. In a normal society where people love and care about one another, the fact that women are gradually being empowered should not make men feel like they're losing their masculinity and resort to gender-based violence. A woman rising the ladder of success or learning to stand on her own should not be a threat to her partner. When women are socially and economically disempowered, they tolerate abuse and are trapped in poverty and an unending and vicious cycle of abuse and domestic violence. This shows that we have a lot of work to do in modeling both the girl and the boy child so that we can have a future generation that understands and comprehends equality. We need to be careful not to raise a generation of violent and angry men and women. It is much better to catch them while they're still at our institutions of higher learning and teach them to coexist than to have a future generation of broken adults. Ladies and gentlemen, permit me to now touch on some of the findings that were made in the CGE reports I alluded to earlier. These reports established that some of our institutions of higher education were characterized by the following challenges: sex for marks, sex for accommodation, rape, marriage interns, substance abuse, the abuse of peer relationships, financial hardships that lead to other social ills, relationships between lecturers and students, and the verbal and physical abuse of members of the LGBTQI+ community. The reports by the CGE also revealed a lack of reporting in relation to issues related to gender-based violence and sexual harassment due to the fear of retaliation, bullying, and the lack of trust in the system, weak investigations in relation to issues of GBV and sexual harassment, the general slow pace of transformation, underrepresentation of women in key positions, inadequate sexual harassment policies, and the absence of gender-responsive budgeting, a lack of inclusion and compliance with the Employment Equity Act, and the lack of safety. All these challenges point to a general lack of non-compliance with the laws of our country, which are meant to promote and protect human rights as well as advance transformation. The lack of policy development and implementation is a challenge that urgently needs attention in our institutions of higher learning. The PSET system requires the visibility of women in leadership positions, right from an SRC level to the highest office in our institutions. We need to move towards the trajectory of empowering the women in our institutions and grooming them to take over critical positions. Program Director, we want to see a transformed PSET system, which will lead to transformed communities and a transformed country. Let us all participate to ensure equal opportunities for women of all races in the PSET system. There is power in diversity, and together we can do more. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to belabor this point a little bit more and say that one of the reasons why we find ourselves in this quagmire in institutions of higher learning is because we do not comply with the labor laws of our country. I want to emphasize that compliance with labor laws can help us to address the slow pace of transformation in our institutions. For example, the Occupational Health and Safety Act is crucial in holding the heads of institutions accountable for the sexual harassment that happens within their corridors. The Employment Equity Act obliges every designated employer in Section 13 of that Act to implement affirmative action measures for designated groups, which include women and persons with disabilities. Section 15.2 of that very same Act refers to affirmative action measures to include, but not limited to, measures to identify and eliminate employment barriers, including unfair discrimination which adversely affects people from designated groups, and also includes measures designed to further diversify the workplace based on equal dignity and respect for all people. The Basic Conditions of Employment Act aims to promote equality through equal and fair opportunities in the workplace, and this can help advance the gender transformation of the PSET system. The Higher Education Amendment Act empowers the minister to intervene in university matters and to issue directives for further transformation at universities. Ladies and gentlemen, it is within the parameters of the law that we must come up with interventions to promote transformation in the PSET system. The implementation of these laws is therefore a ways and means of providing opportunities and paving the way for women and girls to own their journey. These laws are there to assist in removing barriers to transformation. For us to achieve gender equality and women empowerment, it means we must have processes in place that allow women and girls to thrive in the work that they do. Our actions also need to reflect what we say. More than 30 years into our democracy, we cannot be sitting with 18 male vice chancellors and only 8 female vice chancellors in our 26 public universities. We also need to make sure that in the process of diversity, inclusion, and equity, we also advance persons with disabilities. They've been marginalized long enough, and employers are missing out on their skills and talent and their ability to really do the work. In the process of owning the journey, we need to not leave anyone behind based on their gender, their sexual orientation, disability, status, age, or race. We cannot work without setting any targets. We need to work smarter for us to progress towards achieving gender equality. We need to keep on challenging ourselves as we have a responsibility to promote zero tolerance to the non-compliance with our labor laws, violence, and harassment. We must pledge to promote a working and learning environment free from violence and discrimination. In conclusion, I wish to encourage every one of us to take part in the betterment and development of our country and contribute towards transforming our PSET system and make it as competitive as possible. The process of transformation needs honesty, transparency, and consistency. I thank you, Ke a leboga.
Colleagues, I thought you would stand up when the three speakers have spoken and give them a round of applause because of the emotions and the credibility of their speeches. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you for respecting me. And I was a little bit worried that one of the speakers will say what I wanted to say now. I did not introduce the Deputy Chairperson of the Commission for Gender Equality, commissioners, and others, because I wanted to get the names of the people from Higher Health and the Department of Higher Education. The minister came with Trudy van Wyk, one of my favorite journalists of all time, Fikile Ntsikelelo Moyo. And we have got Commissioner Bongani Ngomani, Advocate Gumede from the Commission for Gender Equality. We have got Dr. Naidu from the Commission for Gender Equality. We have got our very own Deputy Chairperson, Subran Naidu. At times, the Daul Barelsa name is a challenge for me. And we have got Nasvir from Higher Health. So those are some of the colleagues that, I'm introducing. At the Commission, we don't do discrimination when we do things. So hence, I have to introduce them with the full list. Colleagues, allow me to say something in short. DM, Chairperson, and Dr. Ramnik, there's something that I always, when I post on social media, I said, gender equality will be realized in our lifetime. Today, the three of you has given us hope. He has given us purpose to be working for the Commission for Higher Education and Higher Health, because there's alignment. And I believe the cause that we are in, led, spearheaded by the three of you, will reach Giyani, my hometown. However, there's something that you said, DM. On Friday next week, GCIS is having something on a boy child. The Commission for Gender Equality is talking to the men of KwaZulu-Natal about the issues as you raised and the chairperson have raised. Oftentimes, as men, we are defensive when they say men are trash. Men are do this. You say, no, I'm not one. I am one because I know someone who's doing it. So it is time for us as men, like you have said, rightfully said, we introspect and say, what is it that we are doing in our little corners? And I must also hasten to say something that the chairperson of the commission has said. As long as there's no alignment with whatever it's happening, the reports from the Commission for Gender Equality, when she came back as a chairperson, one of the most important speech, it's like Martin Luther's speech, she said the state must, and emphasize that. And the second to which she said, gone are the days where the reports of the Commission for Gender Equality will gather dust. We are going to dust off all the reports. We are going to take them to Parliament, to the doors of Parliament. And that she has done. That she must do, and she's doing it. Professor Ramnik, I like the emotions associated with the presentation. The duty of care in you was there for everyone to be seen. And that to me, it says a lot. You are a caring person that, society must use you as an influencer, not the influencers who do something wrong and later on come to the podium, say, I've repented, I've done it 20 years ago. But now I'm a newborn person. So those are some of the things that as people, and I hope that the presentation will be shared with everyone else. The DMs similarly, so it will be shared with people here. And even people online will share with them, will use different avenues to ensure. And the chairperson speech, however, with our chairperson, there's only one caution that I must give it to you. She freestyles. You can write 20 pages of speech. She will just look at it page by page until last page, and then she got the gist of the thing. She's going to freestyle everything else. Then we'll get the recordings for you. On that note, and I'll be failing if we don't clap hands. I just wanted to summarize because at times, I remember a guy at the church was He was hired to make a summation of what the speaker said. Only did he not realize that he did not realize he did not know how to read the Bible and interpret it. So he went off course. So in the gender discourse, we have to be very careful of what we say. Hence, I was trying to be short and only talking to the issues that were raised. I don't want to be too off-ramp. My chairperson can deal with me on tomorrow. So, colleagues, we're not going to have a discussion on this. It was succinct. It sunk into everyone else, even those online. Whatever you have, you want to raise, even the people of the media, you can raise it. Mkatekwa Siyeshi Palani, she's busy checking her phone, social media. Sipo is checking. I saw them posting. There was a lady from higher education. Nasvir is busy there. I am also looking online. And I must tell you, a DM chairperson and Professor Ramnik, the numbers do not lie. People are very much interested in this discussion. So from now, I will call my dear sister Ceci to come and moderate the next session. I also need to apologize to the House here. We have got Dr. Petiwa Matutu. She is not feeling well. She went to New York to attend something, and then even her voice, may she get well soon, but she's listening to us wherever she is, and we apologize for that. So I'll hand over to my sister to take it from here. Thank you very much. I'll come back at a later stage.
Thank you so much, Program Director. Deputy Minister Dr. Gondwe, the chairperson of the CGE, Advocate Sipanya Mukhali, the CEO of Higher Health, Professor Ramnik. Allow me to say all protocol observed going forward in order for us not to waste time. My name is Ceci Mahlobokhwane, as indicated, the Director for Social Inclusion and Equity. I'm one of those people who love the CGE with all my heart. Program Director, a lot of people, when they are called by the CGE, they tremble, but not me. You know the song that says, I am a friend of God. I'm a friend of the CGE. I nearly said hallelujah. The way I love the CGE, this morning I started at their offices just to greet the receptionist. But I thank God that I'm here on time. Thank you so much. This session that we are going to enter into is a very important session that will highlight to us issues related to sexual harassment, issues related to transformation in our institutions, gender-based violence, and so on. It baffles me sometimes how we all know that gender equality is a constitutional right, but people are not arrested for violating that basic right. Because it's my belief, honestly, that social cohesion can only happen if there is gender equality in our societies. Research has proven that in societies where gender equality is practiced, there is social cohesion and very few social ills, if none at all. And therefore, it says a prerequisite to us having a gender violence-free society, a sexual harassment-free society, is that we should have gender equality. Without any waste of time, I'm going to call upon all our three speakers to come to the fore, one following another. They are all going to speak, and when they are done, it is then that we will entertain the questions. Please accept my sincere apologies. As soon as they are done speaking, my Chief Director, Trudy van Wyk, will take over with the question and answer session. Thank you so much. I will now call upon the UFH Gender-Based Violence Office's Investigating Officer, Advocate Palesa Mpapa, to come to the fore. And when she is done, she will be followed by Operations Manager for Gender Rights in Tech, Ronel Kukemur. And after that, she will be followed by the President of the National Community of Practitioners, University of Pretoria, Dumelo Juk Rasibupye. In that order, colleagues. Thank you.
Morning, colleagues. I hope my presentation is coming up. But as it is coming up, I would like to align myself with the protocol observed in the interest of time. My name is Palesa Mpapa. I work for the Gender-Based Violence Prevention Unit. That's currently changed to Gender-Based Violence Prevention and Gender Diversity to echo issues of inclusivity, as we've heard in the current report that's been launched. As I was requested to make this presentation, what came to mind is the reality that sexual harassment is real, widespread, but hidden. This often goes unreported due to fear, stigma, and lack of trust in the systems, amongst many reasons. And the numbers that you always are confronted with are just but a fraction of what's happening in reality. Institutions of higher learning respond by putting in place policies and specialized units to advance gender transformation. Policies need not only be developed to tick a box, but be proactive instead of being reactional. Gender-based violence prevention needs to be an intentional action with institutions of higher learning. UFH, the University of Fort Hare, participated in gender transformation like most institutions of higher learning. I must say the unit within the University of Fort Hare is fairly new. It was launched last year in March, and prior to its launch, we did have hearings that then allowed or enhanced the process of reviewing our gender-based violence and sexual harassment policy, leading to the need to develop a policy on inclusivity. That's quite progressive. We found this as quite important and critical to the Decade of Renewal's values for the university, as transformation is one of the key values. Alongside this, the university already had a compulsory module for all first years called the Social Transformation Module that is run under the Department of Philosophy within the Faculty of Social Sciences. We feel that is very important, and our intention is to see how we then ensure that this cascades to staff awareness on issues of social transformation, just to ensure that everyone is aware and a part of ensuring that gender-based violence prevention is everybody's business. It is launches of this nature that remind us of the reality of sexual harassment, gender-based violence, and femicide in higher institutions, in order to understand the extent and patterns of gender-based violence and femicide. We do appreciate such initiatives as they help us understand the patterns, the trends that will then align our programs in higher institutions. And we are looking forward to implementing, as we have already started, implementing the findings of this report as per the engagements that have already been taking place. We are today launching, but this has been work in progress. We can talk of a lot of developments that also touch on the fact that as institutions, we also have a community of practice on gender transformation. So that the community of practice is intended at looking at such recommendations. And we would like to, most importantly, appreciate technical advice that we receive from High Health, as well as the CGE. And I'm happy to hear today that the Deputy Minister for Higher Education is very much interested in ensuring that we are in compliance in reclaiming safety in our institutions of higher learning. We can go to the next slide. This has also been talked about by many of our previous slides, but why the interest on sexual harassment? Sexual harassment, as I did indicate at the beginning, it remains on the rise, though hidden. Sexual harassment thrives in power dynamics that exist within our higher institutions. So it is this, in this context of power dynamics and a normalized community of South Africa where violence is so normalized that some forms of sexual harassment remain so subtle, yet they are very much important and they continue to thrive. And we need to recognize and acknowledge such. Abuse of authority also results in sexual exploitation. This compromises the academic program. One may view abuse of authority as something that is far-fetched, that may speak to issues of people, how they relate with their work, and harassment outside of the context of sexual harassment, but it is very critical and central to academic programs and the work environment. Within spaces of higher institutions, both staff and students remain vulnerable. And this is so critical because these are spaces where community members stay in close proximity for more than 3 years. So we cannot ignore the triggers, we cannot ignore the insecurities that this brings if nothing is done. So the manifestations of sexual harassment range from different forms, from physical, verbal, non-verbal, quid pro quo, and within quid pro quo, we know that grooming is one of the very subtle forms that are very, very profound. And what makes it more profound is that survivors or victims take time to realize that, hang on, I am abused. We've also seen this beyond just higher institutions with the recent case that's happening within the judiciary. What of importance in all this is that everyone can find themselves as a victim of sexual harassment, irrespective of their sex, gender identity, or sexual orientation. Both staff and students are affected, the queer community is affected, and members are living with disabilities. And the impact of this are the emotional, academic disruption, reputational damage, and the effect on the ranking of our institutions. We can move on to the next slide. What is important within this slide is that circumstances of quid pro quo would involve instances where a person in a position of power influences or coerces someone to accept sexual advances and thereby offering them a favorable advantage. These are some of the things that happen quite often but are not talked about because of vulnerability. But it is when we've got structures that are known, systems, specialized units that are established, and there's a lot of awareness that's created and protection of victims that we are able to advance and ensure that our vulnerable communities are protected. We can move on to the next slide. This is how sexual harassment manifests itself in higher institution. For students, it manifests in terms of promises for marks, promises to push one for admissions, special treatment and financial gains, whilst against staff members, it would include instances of promised employment to potential employees, promised promotions, job security, as well as special treatment, depending on the circumstances of the survivor at the time. Another context within higher institution that allows sexual harassment to thrive is the issue of conflict of interest that exists within such spaces. And this creates an environment that allows sexual exploitation to thrive. And such instances are those of sexual and romantic relationships that exist in higher institutions. It is something that we don't need to ignore. Luckily, our Higher Education Act does talk about such and ways of managing it, which is very important. Prof. Ramnik did talk about it in terms of one of the protocols. They do have a protocol on sexual and romantic relationships. This is something that needs to form part of our gender-based violence and sexual harassment policies because it's quite problematic if we allow it. And this is primarily because when you also look at the code of good practice, ignorance of taking action or preventing harassment of this nature can lead to vicarious liability for our institutions for failure to act. You can move on to the next slide. And of importance is also the amendments within the Sexual Offences Act that inform us that any female of 25 years and below remains vulnerable. And it means that because of the reality that females that are 15 years and below are a majority within peace-set institutions, it means that we have to approach issues of safety as a mandatory criteria in terms of ensuring that our students are going to achieve academic excellence and our staff members will be able to progress within their work environment. I've talked about this, that the issue of sexual and romantic dates from the higher health institution, but some of the best practices that exist within higher education that we need to look at, and this has been the work that comes from the community of practice, looking at what works and what doesn't work, and those include recognizing intimidation and victimization as an offense. This also is picked from the Sexual Offences Amendment. It's important to also enhance vetting processes as part of staff recruitment. The Sexual Offences Act amendment does talk a lot about the importance of ensuring that institutions of higher learning are retained as safe spaces, and it is about who you allow into the space. And we hope that, Deputy Minister, we can cascade the process of ensuring that the National Register on Sexual Offenders is operational, because we rely heavily on it. And on this is also important for us to think as high institution and stakeholders in the space to say, a lot of our processes happen internally. We use the quasi-judicial process more than even the criminal justice system. And we know that the process within the criminal justice system is not yet so favorable. And that then necessitates rethinking and around developing the PSET system National Sex Offenders Register that we can use to circulate within institutions of higher learning, and our recruitment protocols will touch onto that to ensure that we don't allow staff members hopping from one institution to another that can potentially bring risk. In closing, it is important for us to recognize that sexual harassment is not just a student issue. It is an institutional failure. Therefore, leadership should drive such a change. Considerations that are very key to me are that institutional leadership needs to have a buy-in on this. Locations of the specialized units is very critical. Who the directors of such units report to is very important, and resources placed towards the work of gender transformation. This will go a long way. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
How are you? Are you well?
Yes, we are.
I always find it interesting that we ask people that, but I've never had an instance where someone says, no, I am not well, in a country like ours. I'm not saying we are not honest as people, I'm just saying, these things that we do. I'm waiting for the presentation. I am Tumelo Duke Rasawopi. I think maybe let me just start by introducing myself and get that going while the presentation is coming along. I am Tumelo Duke Rasawopi from the University of Pretoria. I actually am here wearing 2 caps. I also serve as the national chairperson for the Gender Practitioners Community of Practice. In the ministerial task team report, the MTT report, we would be referred to in that context as the GBVCOP. So when you read that document, please also think of the likes of myself and Palesa, who form part and parcel of that community of practice. To some extent, I think I can remember the beginning parts of my presentation, but it helps to see it. So as far as gender diversity and inclusion is concerned, where we do find ourselves, I'll open it on my phone as well. Where we do find ourselves is that we are in a position where we speak within binaries. What we mean by binaries is that we speak as though there is an either or. So when we're speaking around gender, we would say it's either men or women. When we're speaking about men, we also tend to think that this is a man and this is a woman. When we're speaking about women, when we speak about men, we'll say this is a man and this is not a man. And this would show up in ways in which we say, what kind of man are you? You know, that shows us that there's a clear distinction between an either or. It's either you are this representation that has a level of authenticity, or you are that representation that has a level of authenticity. The same would apply even within a binary context if we were speaking around women, how we think a woman should be, the kind of expectations that we have towards them, that would really exist within a binary. And I'm hoping that in this presentation, more than anything else, we are able to have a broader understanding of what gender really and truly means. I think quite broadly in the South African context, especially because when we're speaking around gender, it's usually within the gender-based violence and sexual and gender-based violence context. The general assumption or understanding that people tend to have is that when we say gender, we are speaking about women, and that it has no other understanding or broader articulation within society, even as far as how we articulate challenges that we are experiencing in higher education or post-schooling education and training. As far as sexual harassment, for example, we tend to then just limit it to women and women alone, which to a great extent is sufficient and important for us to be able to spotlight those who are the recipients of the greatest harm as far as gender-based violence is concerned, the most violent representations of sexual and gender-based violence within our communities and societies. But what it also does is that it allows us to negate other representations or manifestations of gender-based violence that do take place within the sector. So I'm hoping that in this presentation, we'll be able to really expand that yes, indeed, it is important to drive the rights, inclusion, and equity for women within the post-schooling and education and training sector, but also that there is a broader spectrum as far as gender inclusion that we need to think about. And what also is a misconception is that when we're speaking around gender diversity and gender inclusion, the assumption seems to be that we are speaking particularly about trans people or gender non-conforming individuals. Yet, if you are cisgender, which means born, we'll deal with it hopefully when the slides pop up. If you're cisgender, it simply means that your body, as far as your sex, your biology is concerned, aligns with your gender identity. There would be representations of gender diversity as well. In the same way, when we're speaking around sexuality, a common assumption or misconception is that we are speaking about people who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, and so forth. But even if you sat here and said, I identify as straight, as people would commonly say, that in itself is a representation of sexuality as well. So in inclusion, it's the idea that we need to, yes, focus on those who are the recipients of the greatest levels of harm. But in actual fact, advancing gender equity, gender inclusion, is advancing the representation of all of us. If we are saying that we need to create a safer university spaces for people who are gender diverse, it does not only limit it to people who are transgender or those who are gender non-conforming, it allows us equally so to have a representation or inclusion of those who may represent as men, but not quite fit into the conceptions and ideas of masculinity as they are constructed in our day-to-day interactions and as they are constructed in our different backgrounds and groupings. So transformation in the higher education sector would really entail us creating a system that is free of all forms of unfair discrimination. And I think it is quite important that we think of all forms of discrimination as systemic. So the truth of the matter is that whether it is Duke in that particular office of power or not, truth of the matter is that the issues will persist because they are structural. They are also embodied within not necessarily they are embodied within not just offices, but institutions that have their own rights, that have their own autonomy, that have their own existence. And that in itself means that they have institutional cultures that can continue perpetuating these forms of harm, regardless of who occupies that particular office or not. So there are systemic, fair forms of discrimination. We need to understand that, yes, it's great and important to have policies, but these things systemically persist. We also need to think even around the artificial barriers of access and success. So the artificial barriers, for example, in the context of women is that we can really include them within a university's context, for example, but there is an artificial barrier to access and success. It's not like there is a door that enters you in.
When the Deputy Minister and the Chairperson nicely go outside to have an encounter with SABC. Yeah. So in the interim, we're suggesting 10 to 15 minutes break because we are depriving those online a lot of information. We apologize, sincerely so. Yeah. Sorry.
Good to finally meet you.
Sorry, colleagues, you can help yourself to tea while they try to fix the tables and everything. We apologize. Thanks. Yeah. they say I must use my natural voice. Hi, colleagues. We're back live. We're gonna call Duke to continue with the presentation. The only disadvantage now, he has to shorten it a little bit, looking at the time duration. But he has to start from the scratch. That's another disadvantage on his end. Duke, the presentation is here. There's Trudy here for you. So I'll hand over to Trudy and Duke. Yes.
Oh, thanks.
Yes. Where's this?
Jabu, so how much time do I have so that I...
No, the lady has spoken.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she's the one who has taken over from Ceci.
Okay.
She has to go somewhere.
No, that's fine. Okay, we've transitioned. It's no longer good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. I noticed that before I didn't say all protocol observed. So all protocol observed, maybe it's my fault that the electricity left because I did not acknowledge the powers that be. But yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think, yeah, we're good to kick it off. You can go to the next slide. So, as expressed, I'm Tumelo Duke Rasovopie. Duke is a nickname that has become formalized. So yeah, please just call me Tumelo or Duke, whichever one of the two is perfectly fine with me. As I said earlier, I'm wearing two hats. I am from the University of Pretoria's Transformation Office. I'm a specialist in diversity and inclusion. I'm also from the Gender Practitioners Community of Practice, and I'm the national chairperson there, and that's my email at the bottom for anyone who may want to contact me further. Thanks. So, when we're speaking about gender diversity and inclusion, we are speaking about co-creating spaces of engagement, and these need to be safer spaces of engagement. We would say there isn't really anything like a safe space. We would say safe spaces do not exist, but there's always room to create safer spaces for us to coexist and thrive in. We can always create more room for other people to have inclusion within the spaces in which we work, in which we interact, in which we engage with each other, such as higher education institutions. Next slide, please. So when we're speaking about transformation in higher education, we speak to creating a system that is free from all forms of unfair discrimination. And it's a system because we know that these forms of unfair discrimination are systemic. So like I said earlier, it does not matter at times who is occupying that particular office. If it is the culture or it's the system, the bureaucracy of that particular office or institution to exclude people, then they will remain excluded. So we need to be mindful of not only just having interventions that really are addressing what may be the symptomatic issues, but rather something that deals with a system as well, deals with the challenges and issues that we are looking to address at a structural level. We are also talking about addressing the artificial, please go back, the artificial barriers of access and success. And like I said earlier, when we're speaking, for example, around gender equity and when we speak around gender inclusion for women, for example, having an institution that has a majority of women may not necessarily mean that that is inclusion. That would merely be access, and it would not necessarily mean that in actual fact they have fair opportunities to succeed as well. And that was mentioned earlier when we're looking at the levels of leadership occupation that women may have within higher education institutions at decision-making levels. And there's been some programs in that regard to implement that. But I think we would still need to see a much greater inflow or rather much greater representation of leadership positions that have been occupied by women. We are speaking also around building on principles of social inclusivity, mutual respect, and acceptance. And the acceptance part for me is really quite important, especially when we're speaking around gender diversity, because we tend to speak about gender diversity within a binary. We speak of it as something that is only limited to either or, whether it be men, whether it be women. And this tends to be a neglect or an ignorance towards what else as far as diversity may be present within our institutions. Also, when we're speaking even in those contexts, we tend to think that there is only one kind of representation of a man, one kind of representation of a woman. But more often than not, when we then speak about gender based on the kind of issues that we are experiencing societally that also are prevalent in the higher education sector, we tend to think women automatically means women. We tend to think gender automatically means women and doesn't quite extend itself in the diversity that there is the representation of women. Also, we tend to think that when we're speaking about gender, we are not quite inclusive of men and those who are transgender, those who are gender non-conforming, and so forth. I thought it is important to ensure that there is that demarcation as far as sex, gender, and sexuality is concerned in driving inclusion within the sector. So sex is really more than anything a biological distinction. So you are born, or even prior to you being born, there is a scan on a sonar, and the doctor in appropriate manner tries to figure out what genitalia you have, and in there determines male or female. Now, when we're speaking about a binary as far as either or, we tend to think that there is only one kind of manifestation at this level, that there would be that each individual will either outrightly have the biological or genital or reproductive organs that are associated with a female, or those that are associated with a male. But when we're speaking about sex, that is pretty much the distinction. And a lot of the times when we are talking about gender-related matters within the higher education sector and in the country as a whole, we are taking them from a sex categorization and not necessarily from gender in its diverse representations. So that's important for us to think about, because when we are thinking then around gender, we are looking at what a person, society, or legal system would define as appropriate. So as far as the advancement, for example, of women, we would be looking for females to advance in that space if we are looking within a binary. And also you would find that there is equally a further policing of the kind of women who we would think or deem to be acceptable, the kind of women who we would think need to occupy those particular positions, who fit within what the system deems to be acceptable or appropriate. And that can be seen through ideas such as how you conduct yourself by behavior, dress, presentation, and so forth. It's important also for us to just acknowledge that gender is a social construct. So everyone in here is a representation of the diversity of how gender is constructed. How you chose to get dressed today, what you thought may be an appropriate hairstyle for an occasion where the Deputy Minister will be present. Those were all socialized representations or performances of gender. So it doesn't matter whether you're transgender, gender non-conforming or not, you would be embodied within an understanding as far as gender diversity is concerned. And we use these terms to describe people. Someone could have said, yes, Duke is coming, he will speak on. And by virtue of that, you knew who Duke was. We also assign stereotypes to different genders, and that makes it within a binary context to say, but what kind of woman are you? Or would a man really do that? And we are leaning on gendered stereotypes at that point in time. And like I said, we even police our own gender. So as much as we may have systems and so forth that exclude, we've also to a great extent embodied these behaviors that can discriminate, that can marginalize, and we police ourselves via those means as well. So quite briefly, everyone in this room has a form of gender identity or expression, okay? So it's important that when we're speaking around inclusion of gender diverse individuals, we are not just limiting it to those who are trans and gender non-conforming. Because we all have a gender identity as far as how we think of each other that links to really our expression in terms of how we show up and carry ourselves within the space. And that really is for everyone. And that links also with really our sex. Those three things are different. And the sex, gender identity, and expression can be three separate things. So when we are talking about gender inclusion, like I said, we need to move beyond the binary. We need to move beyond thinking that it's an either or, and appreciate that even if someone said, I am cisgender, which means your gender identity aligns with your sex allocated to you at birth, you are still diverse. You are still working within a particular narrative or construct of gender as well. And that inclusion also needs to trickle down to that element. And it's the forms of gender exclusion that are often not necessarily criminalized, but create unsafe spaces within the higher education sector and feed into the perpetuation of structural dynamics that make it conducive for different gender identities and expressions to be excluded. But it also means that if we do not like how you identify or even how you express, it means that we can nullify you and not even see you in certain instances. So for example, when we're speaking around around sexual harassment, if we are honest with ourselves, the only cases and incidents that are trending are either those that are gruesomely shocking to us as South Africans, or those that are representative of people who, when we look at, we say, well, that person actually is beautiful. That person actually is from an affluent background and so forth. So there are bodies that we generally do not acknowledge, and it's because we have these ideas and these representations of gender that we have expectations of on people's bodies. And if you don't meet those expectations, even as far as justice or being seen can have you excluded. You can skip really the next slide and go to the third one. This one is fine. So, sorry, go back. So it's also then just important for us to acknowledge that when we say someone is trans, we're not necessarily even speaking to their sexual orientation. So in essence, everyone here has the right and freedom to love and be sexually romantic with whoever they desire to be sexually romantic with, and sexual orientation is not limited to just people who are queer and gay. So you can go to the next slide. So we need a rights-based approach, and that simply means that there are legal obligations towards driving gender inclusion. So we have a legal obligation. So it's not necessarily about whether we agree or not with someone's life decisions, it's just simply that we have a legal obligation. You can go to the next slide, and that's just some that affirm that level of identity or inclusion. You can go to the next slide. Next slide as well. So there are opportunities for inclusion. You can review institutional policies, you can develop new ones, you can expand the level of institutional support towards even transitioning staff and students, but also towards students who, for example, come into residence spaces and don't quite fit in as far as the men expectation in a men's race or women's expectations that are imposed upon in a woman's race. You can encourage those inclusive and institutional student life culture practices. Next slide. I think research is another area where we are really not touching on gender diversity appropriately, and it also comes out in some of our legislation that acknowledges and affirms a binary, even though by affirming that binary it acknowledges that that binary is not the full scope of gender diversity and inclusion within our institutions, and the use of inclusive languages. So you can say hello everyone in a public space like this, and that would have covered everyone. Next slide. So I would be amiss if I didn't mention the gender practitioners community of practice, who really are doing fantastic work across all higher education institutions. Established in 2022 via Wits University through the Gender Equity Office. This is really a collaboration of gender practitioners across all South African higher education institutions doing fantastic work, benchmarking, doing interventions at a policy level, through partnerships, even through programs as well. And really it's about promoting gender equality, inclusion, and curbing the prevalence of sexual and gender-based violence. And some of this work has been noted as important in the MTT report, where we've been mandated to work with organizations and institutions like yourself, DHEAD, CGE, to ensure that we audit the rate at which policies are in place in higher education institutions and whether those policies speak to the needs of the institutions as far as diversity inclusion is concerned, and the safeguarding of staff and students and anyone else who enters a higher education institution as far as the prevalence of sexual and gender-based violence is concerned. So part of what its mission is to drive a coordinated effort, as I said. So a lot of silos exist, but we found that through the community of practice, we've been able to drive a coordinated response provincially, and that's been quite fantastic. We also supported strategic input and support across all structures that are involved in doing great work within the post-schooling education and training sector, in particular within the 26 higher education institutions that we are part and parcel of. And also in ensuring that there's ongoing advocacy and awareness within our institutions, ensuring that we are addressing gendered harms, violence, and injustice. And like I said, when we say gendered harms, it's advancing gender equity, it's advancing gender justice, it's also ensuring that that goes across the spectrum as well, especially also incapacitating each other around case management and how we respond to cases and incidents of sexual and gender-based violence. So opportunities for collaboration with the COP would be in fulfilling the implementation of reports. So that would be at a DHEAD level, CGE as well. CGE came on board at our conference last year to really support and drive that work, and we trust that that partnership and collaboration would continue. DHEAD as well came through, and we trust that that will continue and grow as well. In driving transformation, gender justice, and social inclusion as well is part of the collaboration opportunities available in partnering with the gender practitioners community of practice. And yeah, it also helps us in ensuring sustainable relations, avoiding silos, and what it has done very well is even at a provincial level, ensure that there's collaboration with amongst institutions, which wasn't quite the case before. So we are able to deal with trends that really impact our institutions. Next slide. Yeah, so like I said, it's important that we do not confuse access to mean inclusion. We can have an institution that has 70% representation of individuals who identify as women, but that's just access. They were able to enter the space. It doesn't necessarily represent inclusion if there isn't social inclusion, if they are unable to participate at all levels of the institution, if they are unable to give inputs into decision-making spaces, if they are unable to direct the kinds of policies that would affect them as far as their promotion is concerned, that would affect them as far as them being able to play their roles socially in the home and still be productive and effective within the institutions that we all form part and parcel of. So let's not assume that that is inclusion. And more often than not, that level of inclusion would be representative in the level that which that particular demographic that is marginalized is able to achieve aspects of success. So and success can be seen through acquiring leadership positions, being in decision-making bodies or offices. Inclusion or success, as far as inclusion is concerned, can be seen in having policies that see you, that affirm your existence, and that drive your inclusion, and that really enforce that if anyone negates your existence or discriminates against you in very specific ways, so when we are speaking about gendered forms of discrimination, sexism, homophobia, and transphobia, that there will be punitive measures and not necessarily warnings. But also if you're thinking around higher education and academia, success as far as inclusion is concerned would be seen also in individuals, would be seen as well through individuals being able to move up academic ranks, not just being a junior lecturer, but moving to be a senior lecturer, to being a professor, getting PhDs as well, being able to really and truly contribute meaningfully in an affirming way within the higher education space. And that would be across the gender spectrum as well, taking into account that certain people would need concessions because historically they have been excluded and marginalized. And I think that's my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Duke. Duke, in his capacity as the president of Committee of Practitioners, was working with the Commission for Gender Equality in December. We worked very well together, and we're grateful for that work, Duke. DM and Chairperson, before I came here, this is not my platform now. I was thinking about the issue of patriarchy, taking charge and being domineering in society. And I was afraid to come back here. When Trudy called me to come to the podium to introduce the next guest speaker who is online. We're calling upon online. Do we have the presentation and everything set? That side team. Ronel Kukemur, who is an operation manager at Gender Rights in Tech, to engage on observation on GBVF. They are online. So this one will be taken online. So do we have everything set? We are good to go. Thank you, Mika. Thank you.
To Koketso, because she really moved mountains for me to be able to present to you today from Taipei. So thank you for all of your hard work. And I've very aptly been tasked with talking about the intersection between technology and sexual and gender-based violence and femicide right after that bout of load shedding that we just had. So it was a great illustration of one of the vulnerabilities of technology, and that's something that I'm going to explore a little bit in our conversation today. So my name is Ronel, and I am the operations manager at an organization called Gender Rights in Tech, or GRIT. It's an organization that is committed to leveraging digital tools and technology to support survivors of gender-based violence. And today I'm going to sort of touch on what some of the previous speakers spoke about, but with a much more central lens around how digital innovations are reshaping the responses to sexual and gender-based violence in higher education settings, and hopefully address some of the unique vulnerabilities on campuses, but also examining both the promises and the pitfalls of these kinds of interventions. So for those of you who have heard of us or who haven't heard of us, GRIT used to be called Kwanele, and we are basically an NPO that works directly with survivors using technology and using tech-based interventions to help survivors access care services, justice services, and post-violence care. But what makes us quite unique in this space is that all of our technology is very consciously and deliberately co-created with the communities and the people that it's intended to work for. So the technology is not something that we think about in a lab or in an office somewhere. We travel throughout the country and we work with co-creators to make sure that our technology represents the interests and the digital literacy levels of the people it's intended to serve. And we believe very strongly in that sort of participatory engagement and building of technology. So I'm going to start by giving you a sort of rough outline of what we're seeing as an organization in terms of the challenges at institutions of higher learning, and then I'm going to show you some of our technology so you can get a sense of the kinds of work we're doing, and then I'm going to end with a sort of call to collaboration and also speak to a bit of an emerging trend that we've seen as an organization. So as a lot of the speakers today have already spoken on, sexual and gender-based violence on South African campuses encompasses a very wide range of abusive behaviors. And this is including both in-person violence and technology facilitated GBV or TFT GBV. And as our educational institutions become increasingly digitized, students, especially women, LGBTQIA+ individuals, and people with disabilities, are exposed to risks in both physical and virtual spaces more and more. These risks are including cyberbullying, non-consensual sharing of images, and online stalking, in addition to sort of physical in-person forms of harassment and assault. And what the emerging research is also showing is there's a very clear relationship between online and offline violence as well. And something that's quite interesting in this space is that this emerging post-COVID integration of online platforms into academic administration and learning has inadvertently created new avenues for abuse, making it imperative to sort of take ownership of the sort of tech-driven measures that are being used to target people. And while many campuses have formal policies on physical forms of gender-based violence, such as the sexual harassment guidelines, the previous speaker spoke very interestingly about the laws and the regulations that are in place to try and control for that. And there's some really encouraging work with gender equity officers. I know Grit has worked quite closely with the gender equity unit at UWC, but also the previous presenter, we had the privilege of presenting at the conference held last year, and it was a very encouraging space to be a part of. What we find is that the sort of digital interventions here are falling short. So reporting mechanisms are also increasingly being shifted online, but these systems can often be quite opaque or slow or inconsistent, and survivors are often encountering like very bureaucratic digital portals that lack that very trauma-informed design. And this not only undermines trust in the institutions, which as we know is already often quite eroded, but it also can exacerbate the emotional toll of reporting the gender-based violence. And such shortcomings point to the need for digital solutions that are both efficient but also, and very importantly, empathetic. And I really enjoyed the previous presentation because it spoke to that idea of intersectionality really well. And digital platforms like physical spaces do not serve all students equally. Intersectional vulnerabilities mean that marginalized groups like women, like LGBTQIA+ individuals and students with disabilities face compounded risks online and offline. And additionally, economic dependency on scholarships or NSFAS funding heightens these stakes, right? A misstep in reporting or an insensitive digital interface can deter survivors from seeking help, or students fear retaliation by the system or the institution, or they fear they will lose their funding, they will lose their space in residence and things like that. And these challenges are demanding targeted digital interventions that recognize and address the varied levels of risk. And the very exciting opportunities within these sort of digital interventions is that we are able to build a much more convincing and scalable evidence base for the effectiveness of these solutions and the work of these officers as well. And this persistence of gender-based violence in South African higher education is also a digital reflection, actually, of long-standing societal issues within the country. So legacy structures from colonialism and apartheid have entrenched patriarchal norms that are now permeating online platforms. And I'm going to talk about why that's important in a second. And as educational institutions transition to more digital operations, these inherited biases are often embedded within the technology itself, affecting everything from the language used in the apps to the design in the report and to the design of reporting tools as well. So this dual impact then of gender-based violence, both physical and digital, can really disrupt campus life profoundly. Survivors may experience long-term psychological trauma, academic setbacks, social isolation, compounded by now also this pervasive fear of like digital surveillance and retaliation. The resulting atmosphere not only hinders educational engagement, but also stifles the potential for digital innovation in safeguarding student welfare. To give you an example of what I'm trying to say, I've been a UCT student for nearly half of my life, and I remember when I was a part of the Fees Must Fall and Roads Must Fall protests 10 years ago, the organizing of the sort of disruptive spaces was very different to the way it's being organized now, but also how students are disrupting classes online, it's been fascinating to see the transition between taking up space in the physical world versus in the digital world, and the effectiveness of both of those tactics is very, very interesting, and is a really great illustration, I think, of how we cannot ignore the online reality of higher education anymore, and that gender-based violence is part and parcel of that as well. Then I also want to sort of touch as well, importantly, on the movements like Roads Must Fall, but also the Am I Next movement that we saw in the wake of the rape and murder of Uyinene, catalyzed policy reforms, but also inspired much stronger digital activism on campuses. And these initiatives sparked the development of online platforms for reporting GBV, and they sparked the creation of these units and these special tribunals and investigative spaces as well. But the pace of institutional adaptation remains quite uneven across different kinds of institutions of higher learning. And the challenges lies in converting this activism into effective tech-driven support systems that meet the nuanced needs of students, but also students as survivors. So while students are facing physical constraints such as housing issues and shared accommodations, they also now are dealing with sort of violence within the digital realm as well. Online spaces, often inadequately secured, become extensions of physical vulnerabilities. And the lack of privacy in both realms on campus hinders survivors from seeking discreet help. And additionally, the power imbalances between students and lecturers or administrators can extend to digital interactions as well, where authoritative figures control access to critical online resources and reporting systems. And the financial instability remains a significant barrier, as many students are still dependent on funding and bursaries, and the digital tools that are intended to streamline reporting and support can sometimes add an extra layer of complexity or risk. For example, poorly designed apps can expose sensitive data or fail to protect anonymity, and that deters survivors who might fear economic repercussions or institutional backlash, especially when we see students wanting to report the abuse of power by supervisors and things like that. I just want to make sure that I'm going to... So there's a lot of... I've given you sort of the scary sort of side of things, and there are a lot of pitfalls in this, but there's also a lot of promise. And at GRIT, two of our main concerns, because we've had conversations and really beautiful, rich, exciting conversations with institutions of higher learning all over the country, with UNISA, UCT, UJ, UWC, Vol University of Technology, definitely for NWU. We've really had some really exciting engagements, and UNISA, and we've been invited into a lot of spaces. But we have two sort of concerns that we're also starting to see surface more and more. And the first is this sort of growing reliance on technology as a means to navigate instances of violence and facilitate rapid response to violence. But technology is inherently imbued with biases and systemic inequalities present in society. And the reason that's important is because we see a lot of tools being touted as a way to navigate or circumvent stigma and shame associated with gender-based violence, because apparently tools like chatbots or tools like apps, because there's no human being in the loop, it's supposed to be a non-biased sort of space. But we know that that's not true, because technology is built by human beings and so isn't neutral, but it's given this sort of guise of neutrality. Narratives around violence, victimhood, and identity politics are not extraneous to tech. They are embedded within the very algorithms and infrastructures of these digital tools. And this is particularly disconcerting given the emerging discourse around artificial intelligence, which is, everybody's watchword for at the moment, which is very often portrayed as a neutral and unbiased sort of way to circumvent things. And such characterizations are very misleading, because no technological system can entirely transcend its socio-political origins. South African institutions of higher learning have an indispensable role here, though, which is exciting, because by challenging the fervor, activism, and intellectual rigor of the students, these institutions can spearhead the development of tech-based interventions that are both responsive to and informed by the lived realities of gender-based violence survivors on campus. Our second big concern is that while there is a very enthusiastic push to innovate, I almost want to call it like the space race of institutions of higher learning right now, is this proliferation of panic and safety apps tailored for specific campus communities. The risk lies in the dilution of gender-based GBV's complex and nuanced language. So, for example, we're seeing a big push now to create like campus-specific safety apps, like the one I'm going to demonstrate for you in a second. And having it very tailored to a specific campus community, but it's not being marketed or packaged as a gender-based violence specific intervention. And the risk with that is it's more sort of being pushed as like it's a general safety tool on campus. And the risk with that is that it dilutes the sort of nuances of gender-based violence by making it a much more broader safety issue and putting gender-based violence under a very broad category of violence. And it sort of reduces the problem to very generic concerns about safety. And it also inadvertently reinforces a very militarized and surveillance-orientated approach on campuses, which we've seen historically why that's such a problem. So what I'm going to demonstrate for you now is the GRIT mobile application, and it's purposely designed for survivors of gender-based violence, and its development and ongoing refinement has involved stakeholders, some of which are, I think, in the room or who are representing institutions that are in the room, but also stakeholders who are deeply, deeply well-versed in the politicized issues surrounding gender-based violence, like the complexities around victim-offender dynamics, like the complexities about reporting, about stigma, about shame, and about the sort of very, countering that sort of oversimplified narratives that we hear a lot about around gender-based violence. And so the GRIT app, and hopefully if there are other apps that come out from this as well, is informed by the particularities of sexual and gender-based violence, rather than being subsumed under this broad and potentially quite counterproductive umbrella of just an anti-violence technology. So I am in Taiwan at the moment, which means they're not going to be able to call me. Koketo, I see your message now. I think what I'll do is I'll end there, just to sort of give the broad overview, and encourage people to look into our mobile application, look into our chatbot, and see what technologies, what kind of interventions are possible, and how these interventions can be driven by co-creation and participatory methodologies, as opposed to sort of people sitting in labs or the IT departments of the universities leading the process. And then I think I'll end with a call for collaboration. We're always looking to work with students, with lecturers, with administrators on co-creating our tech, on critiquing our tech, giving us feedback on our technology, but providing spaces where we can leverage technology in a way that is contextually relevant to the South African context, but also speaks to the needs of survivors of gender-based violence. Thank you.
Thanks, Ronelle, and thanks for a very insightful presentation. Colleagues, luckily I'm very tall. I can stand here and you can still see me. I think I'm as tall as this lady standing on the stage. So I just want to say, Palesa, Ronelle, Tumelo, thanks a million for the presentations. Sorry that the basic technology was letting us down. The basic technology of electricity, or the basic right of access to electricity, has let us down here. We will unfortunately not have time for discussion because that will run into the next session, and because we are already in lunchtime. So I'm going to very shortly just say thank you to the three presenters. Thank you for the insightful way that you not only educated us, but also gave us pointers in our future work. And one thing that Palesa said is advancing gender equality and institutions free of any form of discrimination is an impetus for every institution. And if that is not taking place, it's institutional failure. It's not failure of one person who is offending and gender-based violence and doing gender-based violence. It's an institution that is failing. And I think it's very important that we have to look at our institutional management, at our institutional leadership, that there is really work towards eradicating gender-based violence in our institutions. And then I just want to say to Melu, thanks for showing us the importance of collaboration. And I think the last presentation of Ronelle was also very insightful, that public and private sector can work together in terms of addressing gender-based violence. And Tumelo, you also, for me, it's so important that people are not just saying on the bad things, what is happening, but you direct us towards opportunities. And that is so encouraging, that there are opportunities, there is a way forward of collaboration where staff, students, leadership, and the outside world are working together, working with SAPs, and so forth, so that we can create. And you know what catch me was your theme of your presentation. And I want to rephrase it as co-creation of conducive spaces for learning. Because that is why universities are there. They are not there for any other reason than it's a conducive space for learning. And if we are not creating that safer space for engagement, that safer space for learning, we are also at fault, and we have to address that. And I think that is always so important. And that is why, Minister, I really think the leadership that you are giving to us at the moment, to saying bring people together at university level, at campus level, that we can address gender-based violence at our campuses, and for everyone that we have a safer learning space. And then how to make institutions functional. We have to combine the hardware, the software, as well as the warmware, the people. We cannot just do technology. We cannot just have hardware. We cannot just have software and beautiful applications if people, our warmware, are not doing the work, are not working towards a better future for me, for my children, and every learner in our community. And then I just want to say, if we can take up this challenge as a sector in the PC sector, we would be really doing our children and our students justice, and not the injustice that's taking place at the moment in our campuses. So with that, I'm going to ask if there's any questions for the people online. Please post your questions in the comments, and I can ask the presenters then to answer you online. And then also the people that's here who have got any questions, will you please write it on a piece of paper, give it to registration at the back, and we will make sure that our presenters answer your questions. So with that, I'm going to close this session and say thank you to the 3 presenters, and also to our technical team who has very eloquently managed this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At times you copy the good things. I should think I'm equally tall. Now I can stand here. Colleagues, we're almost there. Some of them things we are quite aware of the rights of individuals, that you must have lunch. We won't stand that long between you and lunch. Now we'll call Ms. Koketseseku to take the lead on the next session. And the good thing is that, well, it's good and bad at the same time. Dr. Petiwe, it's not here. We won't take that long. Thank you very much. Ms. Koki.
Thank you. Greetings. Good afternoon. Good afternoon to the Deputy Minister Mimi Gondwe, to our Chairperson, Advocate Ntabiseng Sipanya Mohale, to our Deputy Chairperson, along with Commissioners, to the CEO of the Commission, Dr. Matutuka, and the CEO of Higher Health, and to all the stakeholders in the room and online. I believe that I'm following protocol. Thank you. In front of you is Kokezo, and the surname is Siku. Welcome to this critical engagement. I'll be now expanding on the conversation. More importantly, we are here to chart a way forward, colleagues, because while these issues have been extensively researched and reported on, what is needed now is action and accountability. Higher education institutions should be spaces of learning, growth, and opportunity. However, and I say however, many students and staff, because remember, institutions of higher learning are also a place of work. So we should also include the staff as much as we are speaking about students. There are women as well. There are women who are queer, gender diverse. There are also individuals who has disabilities. We have also minors who come from different spaces, and they are termed to be foreigners or migrants in spaces of higher learning. They all face disproportionate vulnerabilities within the space where we assume growth and opportunities. So now, in the Commission for Gender Equality, we have consistently shown that gender transformation in universities remains slow and inconsistent through our investigations, through our outreach efforts, through also our different interventions and initiatives in this sector. So gender transformation in universities remains slow and also inconsistent. Many institutions are failing to meet targets for gender equity in leadership, staffing, and student representation. So now in this segment, I also want to highlight that sexual harassment policies exist. Yes, they are there. However, enforcement is weak, colleagues. We have seen it. We are speaking about it. We are addressing it right now. Reporting mechanisms are also inadequate, and survivors are often face secondary victimization. There is also a lack of institutional accountability. My chairperson always says that accountability is key. That's why the state must, we need to look into accountability and also commit to accountability. Identify the role players who are supposed to action accountability. With many cases of gender-based violence, SGBV, date rapes, sexual harassment, cyberbullying, is either ignored, mishandled, or not leading to meaningful consequences for perpetrators. So now our goal today is very clear: to move beyond identifying problems and to focus on concrete solutions. The question we must ask today is, what is preventing real change, colleagues? And more importantly, what must be done to break these cycles of impunity and some institutional inactions? So now, to unpack this issue, we have invited the NPA to explore practical solutions. So I'm going to introduce Advocate Juliet Mahwata, who will speak on the legal landscape and the prosecution of gender defilements, gender-based violence cases in the PSET sector. Advocate, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Ma'am, I'm not so tall as you, so I have to ascend the podium. Thank you, Program Director. I wish to acknowledge the Deputy Minister, Dr. Mimi Gondwe, the Chairperson of the CGE, Advocate Sipanya Mohali, the CEO of the CGE, Dr. Matotoka, the commissioners available in this place, Professor Aluwalia, and the colleagues from the higher health sector. And I also just wish to stand on the protocol already observed. My name, as they said, is Mkhaiji Juliet Mahwata. I am a Deputy Director of Public Prosecutions for the Office of the DPP in Pretoria. I am responsible for prosecutions of offenses against the vulnerable groups and sexual offenses and GBV and related matters. That's my responsibility in the Gauteng North Division. The invitation I received said I should talk to sexual harassment in these institutions of higher learning, not GBV in general, because that is what we do, and it's clearly an offense and there's no two-way about it. So it will focus on sexual harassment and what the NPA can do in that context. I am not ignoring that GBV is out there. Your sexual assault are straightforward. Your sexual grooming are straightforward. Your rapes, your murders, your femicide, domestic violence is straightforward. It is what we do, but I was not asked in my invitation to deal with that, but I'm not ignoring it. I'll take questions on that. And with that being said, I just wish to talk about the NPA's mandate. Its vision would be justice in our society so that people can live in freedom and security. That will include your students at universities, that where an offense has been committed, the NPA must come in and deal with it so that the universities, the students can live there in freedom and security. And as the NPA, we strive to prosecute. The prosecuting should be by, without fear, favor, and prejudice. And we will seek to serve the public through effective, efficient, and equitable administration of justice. Our mandate is, of course, drawn from Section 179, subsection 2 of the Constitution, and also Section 20 of the NPA Act. And we also have policy directives which regulate how prosecutors on a day-to-day basis are supposed to conduct their duties. You can just pass through that. Those are the provisions of those sections I said. Sexual harassment, I think you have read at length about it. I'm not going to go through it. Let's go to the NPA's response. As I have said, the NPA is mandated to institute criminal prosecutions on behalf of the state in the Republic. And the NPA can only prosecute criminal offenses. And criminal offenses are not created by us. They are created by common law and legislation. Now, sexual offenses strictly it will not all the time fall into a definition of criminal offenses. But when the conduct complained of, what was said and what was done, also satisfies certain elements of an offense, then criminal prosecutions will be instituted. A sexual harassment complaint can also amount to inter alia crimen injuria. Perhaps something was said to you, and when we're looking at what was said, and we're looking at the definition of what crimen injuria is, it falls squarely within that. Then a criminal prosecution will follow if there is evidence. If in the harassment you are also sexually assaulted, let's say for instance, somebody touched your breast, it is sexual assault. If you were kissed without your consent, it's sexual assault. So they will overlap. Then in those cases, the NPA will prosecute. We take it further. Somebody says something to you that amounts to sexual intimidation. Basically, the complaint will have to be looked at to say, this person says, this lecturer, this boss of mine said 1, 2, 3. If we evaluate what was said, and we're looking at the criminal offenses available in this country to say, oh, that amounts to crimen injuria, and there's evidence to support the charge, then a prosecution will follow in those cases. Next slide. I'm just elaborating on what crimen injuria is. Unlawful and intentional and serious violation of the person's dignity or privacy. Usually crimen injuria is tainted with sexual impropriety. So something is said to you, and when we read what you say happened, remember when we receive a complaint, we study it and say, okay, they are saying this and this was said to me. And if I'm reading, I'm like, oh, I see elements of crimen injuria in there. And crimen injuria is an offense, and I've got evidence to support it, then a prosecution is going to follow. Like I said, kissing and touching of the complainant certain parts of the body, not all the parts. The sexual harassment can then amount to sexual assault. The disturbing part that we should take here on sexual assault is, if you read the definition of sexual assault, petting your bum is not included in that definition. And it's the most form of things that, I'm sorry, gentlemen, but unfortunately stats are saying you are the most perpetrator of these offenses. I'm not picking on you. That is what happens a lot. It's upsetting when you read SORMA and you realize sexual assault, they say act of sexual violation. In turn, you must go to sexual violation and see what is sexual violation. And it says genitalia or anus, including breast, and when you read what genitalia is, it doesn't include the bum. And that is what happens in the main. So it is our duty here to take it to the legislature to say you missed something, which happens very, very, very often. Perhaps we can take it to crimen injuria, but remember when we prosecute, we go to the offense that carries the most sentence. That is our aim. Crimen injuria compared to sexual assault will not carry that much of a sentence, unfortunately. So it's failing us there, SORMA, but it's something that we can rectify. It takes a long time, but it is something that we must take here, because you will become very infuriated and say, they petted my bum. I'm reading my law to say, I want to take it to court. What am I going to tell the court this person did? But then the law says it's not included in the definition. With the statutory offense, you are bound by what the definition of the legislation is, and courts will not expand it to say it includes the bum if it is not there. That is the shortcoming that we have. C talks to sexual intimidation. It says any person who unlawfully and intentionally utters a threat to a complainant that inspires a reasonable belief, that's the catch, a reasonable belief that of imminent threat to such complainant that a sexual offense will be committed against them commits an offense of sexual intimidation. Perhaps they say, if you do not come and sleep with me for your marks, I'm gonna, force myself on you, and you believe it, reasonable belief, then we are going to charge with sexual intimidation. Sexual harassment, e.g. quid pro quo instances where sexual intercourse actually take place, may in certain circumstances amount to rape. Next slide. This will be the case if, after a careful examination of the facts, the conduct complaint of negate consent. Remember, rape is sexual intercourse with the victim without their consent. And we must now examine what consent will entail under these circumstances, because in most of them, it won't be a violent forcing myself on somebody, but it will be subverting their ability to consent by using their circumstances against them. Now, if we read and we can say it's arguable, I can go to court and say this consent was not given voluntarily. There was some form of coercion in sort of saying, if you don't come and sleep with me, you are going to fail the module or you are going to lose your job. Then we can argue and say, but that consent was not voluntary. This person was coerced in a particular manner to, acquiesce to this sexual act against them. Those are under those circumstances where somebody may even be charged with rape. If we can argue, and you must examine your facts and say, in this case, I can convincingly argue to court that there was no consent in the legal sense of the word, because it must be a voluntary act without any form of coercion. People may have said, yes, you can proceed, but it's because it was pushed by something that if I don't do it, then these are going to be the consequences. And of course, the power imbalance of lecturer and student will come into play when we're dealing with that, because these people are not going to negotiate on the same footing. One has power and is wielding that power to use it to subvert their ability to say no or yes. Next slide. So, colleagues, from the aforegoing discussion, it is clear that there can never be a hard and fast rule to say the NPA will do this in sexual harassment. It depends on the facts of each case. Each case you have to look at it and say, okay, Juliet is saying, Jabu, said this and this to me. It's sexual harassment, but does it now overlap with a criminal offense that the NPA, fulfilling its mandate to prosecute, can take to court? Now, if the question, the act complaint of also amounts to a criminal offense, if it's answered in the affirmative, now the prosecutor has to follow the process outlined in part 4 of the policy manual. Next slide, please. And that process of instituting criminal prosecution, which it's a source of unhappiness for many people, is this process, colleague. That a case can only be placed on the roll if there's evidence under oath or affirmation establishing the elements of the offense and links the identified suspect to it. This is also when somebody is not arrested, but I'm presented with a case docket for decision. And no final decision to proceed with prosecution should be taken unless, upon a thorough assessment, there's evidence, there's a reasonable prospect of a successful prosecution. Advocate will know what they talk about, the probable cause. I must have had the probable cause to put the matter on the case roll. Otherwise, if I do not have that, there are consequences for me and for the NPA, because the South Africa, everybody has got their rights. Proceed. In response, South Africa has got what we call the Tutuzela care centers. Prof, you touched on them. Up to date, we've got 65 TCC all over this country. TCC are your one-stop care centers for victims of sexual offenses, any sexual offense. Even if you do not want to lay a charge, you can go there and get services, psychosocial services, medical services, and you can leave and go home. But if you want to proceed by laying a charge, you can proceed there and you'll be attended to. And we have seen that they reduce the secondary trauma of having to travel to one place and another seeking assistance. I have dealt here with those, the TCC, in Gauteng province. They are there with their addresses and their contact details and phone numbers. But in the entire South Africa, there are about 65 TCC. One will be open soon in Putadichaba, so there will be 66 not so long. This is where our students and anybody who has suffered a sexual offense or sexual harassment that overlaps into sexual offenses can receive assistance, and also prosecution can emanate from there. As for transformation at your institution of higher learning, I state there it is not, the NPA cannot force them to do that unless it is a statutory offense for failure to transform. So it says to us, to make sure that your policies or your endeavors have teeth and consequences, perhaps there must not just be policies but statutory obligations, which will have offenses. Then when there's failure, we can prosecute, and people do not want to be prosecuted, and thus they will comply with your recommendations to say transform and ensure that transformation has traction. It's not just a 1920 sort of thing that is not moving. And that is where the NPA can come into play. So in conclusion, colleagues, the NPA will prosecute where there's a prima facie case and sufficient evidence to support the charge. And as prosecutors, we are available for awareness-raising campaigns in your universities to say this is sexual offenses, this sexual harassment is also offenses, and what the NPA can do under those circumstances, and what the students can do if something like that has happened to this. The key to this is to remove a stigma from these offenses so people feel free to report in time. The main issue that we struggle with as the NPA is people report after a long time. We will prosecute, but we struggle with evidence. We have lost a lot of evidence, unlike if it's reported immediately. And people don't want to come and report immediately because we are not creating gracious spaces for them to feel safe to come and report. They fear stigmatization. They fear that they will be ridiculed and being victimized, and they keep quiet until they cannot cope anymore. Come and report, but then we struggle to get evidence to support criminal charges. And that is our response. If you want me to talk about GBV in general, that I can do. That is what we do, but it's not part of this because I understood that I must address sexual harassment in those.
Thank you very much, Advocate. We almost there. I had already our HOD legal is getting undue pressure to ask questions. I said, if you want to ask my chairperson questions in this platform, she's going to take the Constitution and other things and in response to you. And we're going to ask for 3 questions, only 3 in this. I'm sorry, the people online, the HOD will respond to you. We're getting some of the questions. Now, can we get 3 hands here? I'm told that there's serious pressure inside. My brother over there, and you will mention your name and the institution you're representing and to whom the question is directed, whether it's the chairperson, NPA, DM, higher health, please. In that sequence, number 1. I've noted you. You can go ahead, my brother. Is there a mic which can be sent to them?
Good day, all protocol observed. I am Kotatso Moloto, the founder and president of Voice It in Action. I actually just wanted to allude to the possibilities. You know, we talk about all these cases and we talk about all these challenges, but where are the exact numbers? We spoke about accountability and action. Where are these actions? We would like to just propose an idea for action, because in talking about the challenges and not putting down actual solutions that we can use, to grab these low-hanging fruits, I think we're missing an opportunity. And I think in this room there's enough potential to make sure that all of these things happen. Imagine if we could have 67 representatives per university. All of these representatives will be students who are then looking at some of the items that have been mentioned in these seatings. They get to address them. They say, okay, what are the challenges in my university? Here are the solutions, and here are the challenges here, and here are the possible solutions that we can try and implement. And I believe, based from the discussions and having these structures in these different universities, focusing directly on gender-based violence and related matters, sexual harassment, rape, etc., we can not only address the issue, but we can make sure that we reach everyone in the country equally. Because there will be a young person somewhere who is speaking for someone. We do know that young people don't speak, in spaces where they can't, they choose to speak amongst themselves. And if we create that space, an environment where students can speak among themselves, bring up these issues, I believe we can not only just address, but we will make sure that our challenges and solutions are accessible nationwide. I was burning to say this because I think it is critical to try and share ideas and strategies that will not only, innovate the fight against gender-based violence, but it could make sure that we have got the young, energetic voices to make sure that it happens. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Kotatso Moloto, the founder and president of Voice It in Action. Ke a leboga.
Thank you very much. And I will also suggest that maybe you seek a bilateral with various institutions which are here as part of you selling the idea. And thank you, Advocate, for that precise presentation. I forgot to thank you. I don't think that was a question. It was just a comment which also ushering us the way forward. But I will advise that you engage different institutions, not our principals. We have got staff members that you can have engagement with and bilateral. We'll take it from there. And I'm also available. We have got Rabu, we have got Silo from the Commission for Gender Equality. Now I'll call Ms. Phyllis Gabela to usher us a way forward. After Ms. Phyllis Gabela, we'll call our Deputy Chairperson from the Commission. I won't be coming here. I want to thank everyone for the wonderful, smooth running of the event today. And we apologize for load shedding. We had no control. It's an external factor. You know about it. It happened, and we apologize sincerely. And those at home, thank you very much. The three institutions will continue to engage with you. We have the relevant persons that you can get engaged. There's Nazvir from Higher Health, C. Posterman from Department of Higher Education, and myself, Jabu Baloi. Then we'll ensure that the relevant institutions do attend to the questions that you raise. And I thank you all. God bless.
Okay, thank you, Javu. The Deputy Minister of Higher Education and Training, Dr. Gondwe, CGE's Chairperson, Advocate Sepanya Mohale, the Deputy Commissioner of CGE, Brian Naidu, CGE Commissioners, the Chief Executive Officer of CGE, Dr. Matodoga, the Higher Health Chief Executive Officer, Professor Ahluwalia, the Chapter 9 institutions amongst us today, stakeholders online and in the room. Please allow me to stand on the protocol that's been established since the beginning of today's program. And with that, I would like to say good afternoon. My task this afternoon is to provide a way forward in terms of the discussions and commitments that have been made today. Presentations that have been provided an acknowledgement that indeed as a country we have a problem insofar as gender transformation is concerned in the post-education and training sector. The presentations together with our reports are highlighting a deep symptom of policies and programs that are non-coherent, thus manifesting as many violations such as abuse of authority, academia exclusions, weak protection of students, and weak compliance with labor laws of the country. This points to us to the issue of policies and interventions that are not fully mainstreamed, thus allowing tolerance to some degree towards abuse, violations, and safety. We acknowledge the progressive presentation that's been made by Higher Health about campus realities, the civic education and soft skills programs, the reporting mechanisms and its protocols, and lastly, the state of mentalities, generally both at student, at management, and at leadership levels in the higher education sector. Equally, we acknowledge the country and the institutional commitment by the Deputy Minister towards addressing accountability on issues of transformation in the education and training sector. We acknowledge the level of acknowledgement of our recommendations at the level of the organ of the state, as the Constitution compels. It compels the state to protect and to respond to issues that seek to undermine the state of gender equality. Our areas of concern are exactly at monitoring the extent to which the relevant bodies are addressing the perpetual sexual abuse and slow pace of transformation, 30 years into democracy in the higher education sector and many other areas. What's been presented today highlights the gaps in the policy environment, policies that are not fully enabling gender equality to thrive in the institutions of higher learning and in many other areas. Despite these transformation efforts, we continue to see a rise in abuse, patriarchal symptoms that are manifesting as sex for marks, policies that are lax in promoting inclusion, weak accountability, poor and underreporting, a scale of sexual abuse that in some instances is underreported, and many other issues. Clearly, a continuous audit on the extent of alignment of policies alongside the amended Labor Laws and Sexual Offences Act is a critical imperative towards providing a solution to the problem. The issue of sectoral collaboration of stakeholders and accountability in the PSET is of critical importance to us. Data indicates a growing number of harm, direct and indirect, coming from on and off campuses. Clearly, this calls for a robust collaboration, Minister, with the sector partners that are in the value chain of the PSET system. Deputy Minister, we would have appreciated to have an audience with the NSFAS, the Liquor Board, and the private accommodation bodies in today's engagement. We view these entities as critical bodies who have a constitutional duty to ensure that there is zero tolerance towards harmful behaviors that could come as a result of their service or their product offering. We will ensure that we engage them equally so that we can monitor if their policies embody the same principle of combating the perpetuation of gender equality and harm. Coming to today's engagement, colleagues, which is premised on launching a stakeholder outreach with a focus on addressing CGE's recommendation on its reports on sexual harassment and lack of transformation thereof. We acknowledge that gender-based violence remains a pervasive issue within South Africans' higher education institutions, thus undermining the safety, well-being, and academic success of students, particularly women and cis women. We welcome the response of this coordinated sectoral collaboration that needs to be taken to the TVETs and universities, because this is where transformation and implementation needs to happen. DHET and Higher Health have made a commitment, colleagues in the room, of taking gender mainstreaming, gender and development capacity training, and public education awareness interventions to the universities that were sampled by our reports. The commitment made is not limited to only sampled institutions. The plan includes a broader intervention to other education institutions, because it is understood that the issue of sexual abuse and lack of transformation is a countrywide challenge, so no institutions must be left out. Also, the commitment that's been made is that a robust student education and information engagements will be conducted across the country to create targeted awareness amongst the students, the student representative bodies about policy provisions on GBV, gender discrimination and transformation. So to my colleague who has actually just put out a question asking the timelines, what is this all about? From what we've had today, I would want to say that these are all interventions which Department of Higher Education and Higher Health had set within their commitments that they are targeted for the 2025 financial year. Addressing GBV in higher education institutions is crucial for fostering safe and inclusive educational environments. Collaborative efforts between DHED and sector partners can amplify the impact of public education, policy mainstreaming, and accountability in ensuring a unified approach to combating GBVF and promoting gender equality. As a monitoring body, CGE, we will continue to monitor the implementation of these programs to evaluate their effectiveness in addressing the issues of transformation and eradication of sexual harassment in the higher education sector. We will continue to advise the sector so that gender equality can be protected and advanced in line with the Constitution and our reports. And I thank you.
Thank you, Program Director. Ladies and gentlemen, all that stands between you and lunch is me. I promise I'm going to keep it very short. Good afternoon, colleagues. I stand on all protocols observed, but allow me to recognize the presence of the DM Higher Education, the Chairperson of the Commission for Gender Equality, my fellow commissioners in the room and online, the CEO of the Commission for Gender Equality, Dr. Dennis Matatoka, who is joining us online, the CEO of Higher Health, Prof. Aluwalia. I hope I got that right, Prof. DM, your contribution, your comprehension of the plight of students in institutions of higher learning is noticed and appreciated. Your positive response from not only your speech this morning, but from the very moment you laid your hands on the CGE report titled The State of Gender Transformation at Tertiary Institutions, is a demonstration of leadership and a yearning to address transformation. We thank you. Prof. Aluwaya, as the Commission, we are delighted that higher education has put transformation, gender-based violence, and gender equality at the center of your framework. The CGE will continue to participate in the task teams to support the multifaceted approach you are well coordinating. In fact, I will urge the HOD-PEI to get in touch with your team regarding Module 2 of the Civil Skills Education and Soft Skills program you mentioned in your presentation, as it is one of the focus areas of our annual performance plan. In conclusion, as a CGE, we urge everyone to be aware of your blind spots when it comes to gender dynamics. The provision of gender equality is a right to be enjoyed by all. Thank you for your attention and your participation.
Yes. Thank you, Chairperson. You see, at the Commission, we work as a team. When you drop the ball, the other one reminds the other. Lunch is going to be served now. They said by 2 o'clock we should be there. A minute after 2, then everyone is going to be stopped. That's what they said. Because of health. At the back there, my colleagues have got food vouchers for everyone who's here. My colleagues have got food vouchers and parking tickets at the back. Thank you.
Or those that are associated. Thinking about gender-related matters within the higher education sector and in the country as a whole, we are taking them from a sex categorization and not necessarily from gender in its diverse representations. So that's important for us to think about, because when we are thinking that